Did you return my blue jacket?
Yes. And after a very intense conversation with their saleswoman that ended with both of us in tears, I got you a full refund.
I want it back.
Absolutely.
This computer isn't taking my password.
Oh, no, do that. It's my laptop.
Well, bring me my laptop.
Wake me up at midnight, but don't startle me. Play a lullaby or something that just slowly increase the volume.
What are you still doing here?
I'm always the last one here.
I'm always the last one here.
The two of them are always in this office. Let's just lock them in a room together so they can have sex with each other. When they're boning, we're free.
We wanted to shut down the elevator for a few minutes so two people could fall in love. Whoa, who's this guy?
You need to go, sir.
It's go time. Oh my God, this is how it always starts in my nightmare.
What are you doing?
What is he doing?
Stop doing that, please. Stop that right now.
I need to be free of this.
We know everything about them, what they like, what they don't like. We are the men behind the curtain.
Does Rick have good Yankees tickets?
No. He watches from the bleachers like a common peasant.
Yeah, of course he does.
We need the people in these two seats to make out.
The world's our oyster!
Taking the rest of the day?
I'm gonna be in late tomorrow.
We did it. We made two miserable people happy. I'm proud of us.
Do you guys know each other?
We're friends. That's nice. Why'd you say it like that? Why'd your voice go up?
And said that they wanted to bring a case against him. And I got a visit in my offices out in Long Island from two FBI agents. And they came in to see me and they said, "We need to talk to you." And I said, "What do you want?" And they said, "Listen, tell us what you're doing and we'll give you a pass." Yeah, right. And I said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about with gas, you know." So I knew, I said, "Man, this is not good." I mean, I really got their attention now. We gathered evidence, primarily from cooperating witnesses. And when he was faced with a lengthy trial and the prospect of getting a very lengthy sentence, people were being convicted 100 years, 150 years. I said, "They're gonna give me 1,000 years if I go down on this." He decided to plead guilty and to make restitution payments of $10 million, which he pretty much defaulted on.
Michael Francisi, indicted on 28 counts of racketeering, fraud, and extortion.
I'd made two very bad decisions in my life. I trusted my father, look where it got me. I surrendered my life to La Cosa Nostra, and look where it got me. I got death threats, hits all over me. The FBI hates me, everybody on the street hates me. My father disowned me. I don't have a friend in the world. I'm gonna spend the rest of my life in this 6x8 cell. And it was the first and only time in my life that I really felt hopeless. Then he kind of shocked us because he came forward and agreed to cooperate. And based on the cooperation he provided, he did get his sentence reduced. I got 4 years on a parole violation, and I spent 35 months and 13 more days in prison, 29 months and 7 days in the hole. And during that time is when I strengthened my faith and started to read the Bible.
But Franzese gets out and lives to tell the tale.
Do I find it surprising that I'm alive? I feel I'm the most blessed guy walking the streets. What should my fate have been? I should either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life.
The son who once followed his gangster father blindly into the life now walks away from the mob forever, unscathed.
I cannot explain how Michael Franzese was able to do what he did. The only speculation you could have is that he paid his way out. Somehow he was able to persuade people in the Colombo crime family not to do anything to him. Really, the only way that ends is when you end, and you're in a coffin, it's over.
How Michael Franzese got out of the American mob with his life remains a mystery to this day. But the worst deeds of Franzese's past still haunt him, especially the murder of a close friend, Champagne Larry Carrozza. Colombo Captain Michael Franzese walks away from life in the American mob and begins cooperating with law enforcement. But the worst deeds of his past still haunt him, especially the murder of this man, Champagne Larry Carrozza.
Larry Carrozza was someone very close to me. I mean, the kid loved me, and I loved him. I baptized his kids. He baptized my daughter. Unbeknownst to me, he was having an affair with my sister. I was brought in, and it was told to me that this is what was going on.
No one messes with mob women. Those who do pay a heavy penalty.
I was told he disrespected you and he disrespected your father, and that's something that we don't stand for in this life. And I said, but you know, he's not a made guy. I'm stupid. And how do we know what really happened? And let me talk to my sister. And nope, you want to take care of it? You take care of it. If not, we'll take care of it. And I said, I want to do it. I said, the guy's too close to me.
Larry Carrozza's body is found near his car. He is shot a single time behind the ear.
His murder, that's probably something that has been the heaviest on my heart.
These days, it's faith that helps Franzese cope with dark memories of his past.
Guys, be honest. You don't come to church, but you figure, hey, Sopranos is off the air. Let me go see what the real mob guy is all about, right? That's your only... What I did, and that's it. As Christians, we happen to believe that we can be forgiven for what we've done in the past. So I believe with all my heart that I've been forgiven. As a Christian,
a line that's hard for a lot of people to swallow.
People can say it's a phony thing and it's a scam, and you know, fortunately in the end, they're not gonna be the ones that judge me. But I can't fool God. You know, I bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank Michael Franzese. Michael, thank you, man.
Michael Franzese is out of the life today, but his father, Sonny, never walked away.
You know, my dad's 96 years old. He's the oldest living mob guy in America. I think he's part of this life 66 or 67 years ago. He took the oath.
He just recently was convicted at the age of 96. I think he was convicted on racketeering charges and was incarcerated again. Was active until the age of 96, and it's absolutely amazing.
He is a treasure trove of mob stories, if you can get him to talk about it.
Sonny Franzese is a last holdover from the golden age of the American mob. An era that ends with the success of Operation Donnie Brasco, the historic infiltration of the Bonanno family by undercover agent Joe Pistone.
Up until 1970, all you could do with the mafia was like, men with their eyes closed trying to feel an elephant. You would get a little piece of it, but all you could prove was someone who actually committed a particular crime. Joe Pistone did something unique, which is he infiltrated the Bonanno family, an organized crime family, with such success that he was on the verge of being made as a member. In doing that, not only did he collect direct evidence of crimes against the Bonanno family, but he was able to talk knowledgeably about the structure of the whole mafia.
This undercover case was the beginning of the unraveling of the mafia in America as we knew it, as it once was.
All in all, the information Pistone provides law enforcement leads to over 200 indictments and more than 100 convictions of major mob figures. But it is only the beginning of the government's all-out assault on the American mob.
Joe Pistone's role as Donnie Brasco was historic in the FBI, historic in law enforcement.
Pistone broke the confidence of the mafia. He broke the mystique that you couldn't infiltrate the mafia. That mystique was very, very important in getting people to cooperate. Because now all of a sudden it isn't this impregnable organization that nobody's ever penetrated.
Joe Pistone and his case was the perfect storm for organized crime.
We kicked the out of him. We really did.
But the American mob still has enormous power in New York City and around the country in the 1980s.
You always have to use your brain, and you always have to use the gun.
In cities like Philadelphia, home to one of the most violent mob families in the United States,
we live by our own set of rules.
And a major battleground in law enforcement's war to end the rule of Cosa Nostra.
His reign becomes a reign of terror.
I invoke my right and decline to answer the question.
We got away with murder. When you join the La Cosa Nostra, you're in it for life. You have to have honor and respect. But when somebody does something wrong, I mean, you know, they're going to get killed. Louis DeMarco was a junkie who was sticking up a maiden member of the Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra. So Angelo Bruno told us, find them and kill them. Me and Vincent Falcone hid in the one of the rooms in the hotel, and we waited for Louis DeMarco to walk to his car. When he came out, I ran out first and shot him in the back of the head. The power of the blast of the bullet pushed him so much forward, it looked like he was running away. After he fell down, I ran over him and I emptied my gun into him. After we shot him, me and Vincent Falcone ran through the alleyway, and when we hit this certain spot, we threw both guns up onto this roof. And we continued running to my uncle, where he picked us up in the car. When I committed my first murder, it felt like I was doing a good deed for our family. I was killing a bad man.
Mob warfare is on the rise all across the nation. It's just the latest sign of organized crime in America becoming more and more disorganized.
It's 1980, and the United States government is locked in a battle to the death with New York's 5 major mob families.
And that sends the message to these people that they cannot be above the law and that they will be brought to justice and they will be convicted.
But the secret society known as Cosa Nostra still remains immensely powerful throughout the country. A force for corruption and extreme violence, especially in the city of Philadelphia.
Police say that Calabrese was ambushed by 2 gunmen in ski masks as he walked to his car.
Home to the most violent crime family in the history of the mob.
Take 3.
Watch your head when you sit down there.
These men are witnesses to that secret history, stepping out of the shadows now to tell their stories firsthand. A few remain in the shadows, fearing for their personal safety, afraid of an organization with branches all over the country. Like Philadelphia, what happens here in the 1980s will have a direct impact on the heart of organized crime in New York, as one of the most prominent figures in the Philly mob decides to cooperate with the United States government. This man, Philip Leonetti, still with a bounty on his head, has come out of hiding to tell his story. To protect his identity, his face must be blurred at all times. In Philadelphia, he's known as Crazy Phil.
I got a nickname, Crazy Phil, from a radio announcer, and I told my uncle, I said, can I do something about this? And he told me, no pun intended, he says, are you crazy? He said, guys would pay money to have a nickname like that.
Your Uncle Nick told you that you need 2 things in life. What were they?
My Uncle Nick Scarfo always told me, you always have to use your brains in this thing, and you always have to use the gun.
Leonetti's uncle, Nicky Scarfo, is a captain in the Philadelphia mob. But the mob's rule in Philadelphia isn't autonomous. They're overseen by the governing body known as the Commission, run by the bosses of the 5 families in New York.
The Commission was formed in 1931 in Atlantic City. It was started by a guy named Lucky Luciano. Luciano decided that he was going to organize this into a business.
The New York Commission, which truly governed the 5 families in New York City and had very specific powers.
Regional bosses sit on the commission too, and some of them are independent outfits, not under New York's influence. But others are directly under New York's control, and Philadelphia is one of these. It's been overseen by the Gambino family for decades, thanks to the influence of legendary old-time gangster Carlo Gambino.
There's always been this strong connection between New York and Philadelphia. It's only 90 miles away, and Philadelphia's always been in the shadow of New York. If you look at organized crime at the Mafia, Cosa Nostra, as New York is the major leagues, Philadelphia is a AAA franchise.
The Gambino-Philly connection goes back to 1959, when Carlo Gambino personally backs Angelo Bruno as the boss of Philadelphia.
Their relationship goes back to when they were young guys. They were bootleggers together. And all Ange's power as boss was because of Carlo Gambino.
Bruno sat on the commission, And Carlo Gambino had Bruno's proxy vote whenever Bruno couldn't be there.
Bruno is known in Philadelphia as the docile Don.
He liked to keep a very low profile.
He was more like a CEO of a company. He wasn't too much of a gangster. I mean, he ordered murders and all that, but he wanted everything done quietly. He wanted everybody buried. He didn't want to leave anybody in the street.
This was almost an era of relative stability and peace in the underworld.
Did you ever actually meet Angelo Bruno?
I did. There was a time when my great-grandmother died, and we went to the wake, and Angelo Bruno came in to pay his respects. And I said, who's that guy? Because when he was walking in, he had all kinds of, looked like security around him. My uncle, he told me, that's Angelo Bruno. He's the boss of our family. So from a very young age, I realized that he was the boss.
But then Carlo Gambino dies in New York in 1976, and the two cities' relationship changes.
When Carlo Gambino died, Ange lost a lot of power.
Without the personal backing of Carlo Gambino, Philly boss Bruno is vulnerable, and his long and relatively stable reign ends in 1980, on a night that sends shockwaves around the city.
He had gone to a restaurant in South Philadelphia for dinner that night, was driven home. He's parked in front of his house. His driver is sitting next to him. Bruno's smoking a cigarette. The driver pushes the remote control. The windows go down. And then out of the shadows comes this guy in a raincoat, pulls a shotgun out, shoots Bruno in the back of the head. Law enforcement left the body in the car for about 2.5 hours. It's on a Friday night. All the neighborhood comes out, all the media comes out, and there's this Bruno leaning back, his mouth wide open in a kind of a death scream.
The murder of Bruno changed the game.
Everybody in New York was going crazy, like, here's a boss of a Philadelphia La Cosa Nostra family getting killed. What's going on?
Talk in the street is that one of New York's other 5 families, the Genovese, is the force behind the Bruno hit.
No one's ever been prosecuted for the Bruno murder because they've all turned up dead. But the underworld and law enforcement theory is a convoluted tale of double cross or triple cross. Bruno didn't want his guys dealing drugs. And a couple guys, including his consigliere, Tony Bananas Caponegro, was dealing heroin on the side. He had to do it on a sneak. Caponegro's upset about Bruno, and he's grousing up there in Newark about this. He won't let us do this, he won't let us do that. And he talked to some people in the Genovese family about his concerns. They imply that it's okay, do what you got to do. He thinks he's got the commission approval to whack Bruno, because you can't whack a mob boss without commission approval. So Caponegro carries it out. Then he goes up for what he thinks is going to be a meeting where he's going to be crowned the new boss of Philadelphia. And he gets garroted, stabbed, and brutally killed. And they stick $20 bills in his mouth and in his anus to show that he had been greedy, and they leave his body in the South Bronx. And then 3 other guys that were connected to him at that point also turn up dead in similar fashion.
The Genovese family is moving behind the scenes to take control of Philly. They are the most secretive and slippery of all the 5 mafia families. Not even the other mob bosses know who's really in charge.
They're considered the Ivy League of organized crime in New York City. They're smart because they're very shrewd, they're quiet.
They're very intelligent, very sophisticated.
They were the smartest, the most crafty. They knew what they were doing. They don't like to get their hands dirty.
The Genovese have their reasons for making such a bold move. Atlantic City. For most of the 2 decades the Gambinos ruled the Philadelphia territory, Atlantic City is a quiet coastal resort town in decline. But in 1976, everything changes. And Atlantic City becomes a crown jewel of organized crime.
In 1976 is a casino gambling referendum, legalization of casinos in Atlantic City. All of a sudden, that's the boomtown now. money to be made, construction, unions, legal gambling, illegal gambling. And so who's our guy down there? Our guy down there is Nicky Scarfo.
Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo, a captain in the Philly mob with a ferocious reputation.
Scarfo's not a large man, but he's a very violent man. He's a very vicious man, so I guess he makes up for whatever there may be lacking in height with respect to violence.
You know, it turns out the Genovese family wanted my Uncle Nick Scarfo to be the boss of the family. And with that, they knew they would have the Philadelphia family on their side with any votes on the commission. So my uncle said, well, wait a minute. You know, Phil Testa is the underboss, and he is my friend. So I don't think it would be right, you know, for me just to step in as boss.
With Bruno out, Phil Testa becomes the new boss of Philadelphia.
My uncle and Phil Testa, they grew up together. They knew each other for a long time. That was his best friend. People referred to him as Lefty because he would always throw zingers at you to see how you would react. And he always had to be careful.
The Bruno hit paves the way for the rise of Scarfo and his own gang.
When Angelo Bruno was killed, we were really happy about it. Because Angelo Bruno wasn't doing anything for us. We were like stuck in limbo. He wasn't going to make us. He wasn't going to send any work our way or give us an opportunity to make money.
For Scarfo and Leonetti, Bruno's death is the break they've been waiting for. Their new boss, Phil Testa, is a friend, and they intend to take full advantage of that relationship. By the 1980s, Atlantic City is a boomtown thanks to legalized gambling. And the fortunes of the Philadelphia mob and its boss, Phil Testa, are taking off with it.
There were opportunities for the mob that didn't exist before.
I mean, all of a sudden, the state of New Jersey has legalized a vice.
Casinos made a ton of money after they're built. But to get them built, it cost them, at that time, I think it was like $500,000 a day. We laid the foundation for what we wanted to do. Started with the unions and got all of them under our control. We were in a position to make big, big money.
The Mafia became more powerful than any organized crime group had ever become because they had morphed into an organization that had economic power, political power, controlled industries.
The Philadelphia mob starts a company to take advantage of the construction boom, naming it after the man in charge, Testa's trusted consigliere, Nicky Scarfo.
I formed Scarf Inc., which was a concrete company. I was doing all union jobs, but I was a non-union contractor. Nobody bothered me because naturally they knew who I was.
If you don't want labor problems and delays, then your general contractor better hire Scarf Inc. as the sub who's going to pour the cement. And that's the way they legitimized some of what they were doing.
No criminal organization in the history of our country has ever infiltrated legitimate institutions of society the way the Mafia was able to do.
And there's another mob growth industry in this new gambling mecca, loan sharking.
We started lending people money for so many points. Like on $10,000, if you charged them 5 points, you'd be making $500 a week just in interest until they paid it $10,000 back. You already have a reputation for violence. So for someone to come to borrow money from us, they got to be really desperate.
It's Scarfo's job to collect, and Phil Leonetti is his indispensable man, born and bred to be his uncle's soldier.
Phil Leonetti was a fairly intelligent kid. He played basketball for Holy Spirit High School, was a point guard. And at one point, he wanted to go to pharmacy school. But his uncle, he said, pharmacists are sissies. You don't want to be a pharmacist.
His uncle has groomed him since childhood to be a soldier in his mob.
When I was about 8 years old, my uncle Nick Scarfo came to me and said, Philip, I want you to take a ride with me. While we were in this pickup truck, he was telling me the story of this guy, this bad guy, Reds Caruso, who he just killed. And he said he was a very bad man, and we used the truck to dump his body, and now what we're going to do is bring the truck to Philadelphia to get it chopped up, to get rid of it. And he says, I'm bringing you with me so it doesn't look too suspicious. I don't want to be stopped by the police or anything. You know, it made me feel big because he was actually telling me I was an 8-year-old kid. He was making me feel like an adult. My mother hated him, and my mother always told me, what are you doing hanging around with this man? Stay away from him. He's crazy. My mother always referred to him as Hitler.
Leonetti sees firsthand how people regard his uncle on the boardwalk as a celebrity.
My uncle would take me to the beach in the summertime. And this one time, we were walking down from the boardwalk onto the beach, and there was fellas there, these really big guys with tattoos all over the place, which scared me half to death, because I was about 10 years old. But as we got closer, when they seen my uncle, they went absolutely crazy. They called him, said, "Nick, how you doing?" They did everything but kiss his feet. I mean, they showed him all kinds of respect, and I said, wow, they made a big impression on me. That, you know, in my mind, that's the type of person I wanted to be.
A big part of Scarfo's aura is his reputation as a stone-cold killer. A rep that goes back decades to a notorious incident in a diner.
My Uncle Nick Scarfo is in a diner, and he got in a fight with a real big fella. This man was choking my uncle. He was ready to pass out at the counter. But as he was being choked, he reached back on the counter and grabbed a butter knife. And stabbed this guy in the heart. And the guy died. The way he stabbed him, it just happened to hit the guy's heart. And if it didn't pierce his heart, I mean, it would have been just a regular stab wound.
Now he's arrested, and he ends up being convicted of manslaughter. His argument was it was in self-defense.
But he made out pretty good because he got 6 to 18 months. He served like 6 months and was released.
And that's just the beginning of one of the bloodiest careers in the history of the American mob. In the 1980s, New York's 5 mafia families rule organized crime in America with an iron fist, exerting their power through regional bosses like Phil Testa and his henchman Nicky Scarfo in Philadelphia.
If we have a problem with someone, we don't call the police. We take care of it ourselves.
And Scarfo grooms his nephew, Phil Leonetti, for years towards his one true goal, becoming a made man in his crime family.
My Uncle Nick Scarfo always told me that to get involved with the La Cosa Nostra, you got to commit a murder. And with him, he wanted me to kill 2 people because he wanted me to have a reputation as a killer, like he did.
For a lot of people watching, killing for them is the furthest thing from their experience. Maybe you could help us understand what's in your mind.
I had no feelings one way or the other. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't dislike it. I just did my job, my duty. I didn't kill no legitimate people, no nice people. All the guys I killed were guys like myself. Everybody was a bad guy. I mean, this was our life in La Cosa Nostra.
But Leonetti is Nicky Scarfo's nephew, which means the bar to becoming a made man is higher and bloodier. He must kill again, and the target this time is Vincent Falcone, his partner on the first murder.
In the case of Vincent Falcone, yeah, he deserved to get killed. The way he was talking about my uncle, saying crazy things about him. And my uncle went completely berserk and decided to kill him. So we made believe we were going to have a party at this house in Margate. He was getting a little suspicious, so I tried to break the ice a little bit by telling him, go make some drinks, get the scotch, we'll have a few drinks and all. And pulled the gun out that I had in my waist and shot him behind the head. He fell down, and my uncle checked out Vince's body, listened to his heart. He says, give him another shot, shoot him again in his heart.
Scarfo looks into the face of the corpse of Vincent Falcone and says, I love this. I absolutely love this.
He loved murder. He loved killing people. He always says you got to kill and you got to keep on killing them. My uncle just kept saying, I love this so much, the big shot's dead. And he drank so much scotch that he got drunk. He was falling down drunk. That's how happy he was. This is the first time and only time that he hugged me and kissed me and told me he loved me. And then he said, this was big. It's on record now that we did something for the family, and I'm a proposed member, so I'm on my way to be made.
Traditionally, to get involved in the mafia, I mean, you would be an associate at first. Maybe you're picking up some money, taking money here to there. If you get involved and you become an earner, somebody who can be trusted, you become a higher associate. Eventually, you may be proposed for membership.
Becoming a made man is the pinnacle in the American mob, the moment when a wannabe gangster becomes the real thing.
It's called making your bones. And these mob families, in a making ceremony, they pay allegiance, not to the flag, they pay allegiance to the gun and the knife.
Those who become inducted into it to pledge their allegiance to the criminal society and not to turn on or cooperate with law enforcement or reveal the secrets of this criminal gang.
Leonetti's allegiance to mob boss Phil Testa is now secure.
My uncle told us that Phil was opening up the books to La Cosa Nostra to make people. There was a big circle formed, and I walked in the center of the circle, and who's sitting down at the head of the table is Philip Testa and my uncle, Nick Scarfo. And the first question Philip Testa asks me is, do you know why you're here? Naturally, I know why I'm there, but you're supposed to say no. And when you say that, everybody laughs because everybody knows you know why you're there. And then he says, if I needed you and your mother was dying on a deathbed, would you come to me or would you go to your mother? I said, I would come to here first, Phil. He says, I know you would. He said, do you see this gun and this knife on the table? I said, yeah. He says, would you use that to protect anybody here? I said, yes, I would. He says, okay, what we're going to do is, I got a picture of a saint here. He says, your uncle's going to prick your finger, and then I'm going to light the picture of the saint on fire and put it in your palms. He told me, cup your hands, and as the picture of the saint is burning, I want you to juggle it in your hands. And as you're juggling it, I want you to say, may I burn like this saint if I betray my friends. And at that point, I was a fully initiated member. And it meant more, actually, me being made to my uncle than it did to me. He felt proud. It was like I'm part of his world now.
Then overnight, that world is rocked to its foundations.
Philip Chicken Man Testa, blown up by a bomb on his front doorstep.
Phil Chicken Man Testa is probably the only gangster celebrated in a Bruce Springsteen song. And there's a line in the song, they blew up the Chicken Man last night.
Testa walks through his front door and a bomb detonates, blowing him to pieces. The noise so loud, the neighbors think the nearby gas refinery has exploded. It's the dawn of a bloody new era in Philly. Testa's assassination allows Nicky Scarfo to rise to the throne of boss. The struggle for Philadelphia between the two of New York's prominent mafia families, the Gambinos and the Genovese, now tips towards the Genovese. They know and trust Nicky Scarfo.
Scarfo has a line to New York with the Genovese family. And the reason he has that line is he was in jail with a couple other wise guys from New Jersey, including Louis Bobby Manna.
So after they got out of prison, they kept that relationship going.
But the question remains, who killed Phil Testa?
Vincent Giganti was the boss of the Genovese family and a ruling member of the commission, was concerned about what happened in Philadelphia, namely the unsanctioned, unapproved by the commission murders, hits of two mob bosses.
First Angelo Bruno in 1980, and now Phil Testa in 1981.
If that went unchecked, people in Cosa Nostra would get the idea that you could kill a boss of a family without commission approval, without consequence.
The Genovese family now has its man at the top in Philadelphia, but there's some unfinished business.
They told my uncle, whoever was involved, kill him. And that's what we did.
After Philadelphia mob boss Phil Testa is blown up in his own home in 1981, the Genovese crime family summons the leaders of the Philly mob to New York for a sit-down and quickly identify the killers.
It's a guy named Frank Chicken Narducci, a capo, who was considered a prime mover behind the Testa murder.
Newly appointed Philly mob boss Nicky Scarfo is given the contract to administer mob justice.
They told my uncle, whoever was involved, kill him.
Phil Leonetti and his friend Salvi Testa carry out the death sentence.
Scarfo gets Testa's son, Salvi Testa, to be one of his main shooters in all of this.
And Salvi was on it. It was his father, and he wanted justice. He wanted to kill everybody. Salvi Testa was on Chicken Narducci every day until finally one day he caught him just right.
Hey, Chicky.
Salvi told me, Philip, I just gave him enough time to look at my face before I shot him.
When Salvi Testa shot and killed Frank Narducci, according to a couple of wise guys I talked to, Salvi Testa said, I wish he would come back to life so I could shoot him again.
Salvi Testa's on the warpath to avenge his father's murder, and Narducci is not the only one to feel his wrath.
The guy who planted the bomb was a mob associate named Rocco Marinucci. He's found dead a year to the day of the Testa murder. His body is in an abandoned lot in South Philadelphia, and he's got 3 large firecrackers stuck in his mouth. That was the vengeance that he wanted because of the death of his father.
But the Scarfo gang's wave of violence starts bringing real law enforcement heat, and they soon charge Scarfo soldier Phil Leonetti for the murder of Vincent Falcone.
They found Vincent Falcone's body a day later in the trunk of his car in Margate, New Jersey. And once they found his body, then, they're starting to investigate the murder.
The cops squeeze a local plumber named Joe Salerno.
They went to go see Joe Salerno, just as a fluke, because they seen him around us. They never suspected that he would be involved with a murder. And he just spilled the beans and started telling them everything, and they were shocked. They couldn't believe it.
Salerno witnessed the Falcone murder and gives them all up. The government now has its star witness and arrests the ranking leaders of the Scarfo gang.
We were facing life. If we get convicted, we're going to go away for 25 years, and we were ready for it. I mean, we all accepted it.
Salerno describes the crime in gruesome detail.
He was one of the most compelling witnesses that we had because the way he described it, the emotion with which he described it, he could not be making that up.
But then on cross-examination, there was too many statements that he made that we used against him.
The state had hoped an eyewitness account of the December murder would be enough to put the 3 behind bars, but the defense managed to successfully discredit the state's key witness, Joseph Salerno.
As we were walking out of the courtroom after the verdict was read, a television guy came up to him and says, "What do you got to say, Nick?" He said,
"Thank God for the American jury system, an honest jury."
My uncle said that we got away with murder. I mean, we beat this thing. There's no way we should have beat this case.
How does it feel to be home?
It's just one more example of the power of the American mob. Even in the 1980s, it's immune from prosecution. Scarfo is back on the streets looking untouchable, the new boss of Philadelphia.
Once my uncle becomes the boss, it was a great moment for us and for our family because now we had all the unions in Atlantic City and we had all the unions in Philadelphia, so we were in a position now to make money. Since my uncle is the boss, all the captains have to start handing in whatever they make, a piece of every illegitimate business out there, and giving him his end.
And now he's got this honeypot in Atlantic City, wants everybody to pay tribute. So now he's starting to collect street tax. Anybody who's making money, he's got to give him money.
We called that the elbow, us shaking down all these illegal businesses, because it's strong arm, and that's what it meant. So we didn't have to say it. If we were out talking and we were worried about getting picked up in surveillance, we just went like this. We were making millions of dollars every year from the elbow. We make scores sometimes with drug dealers for 200, 300,000 at a time.
But unlike former boss Angelo Bruno, mere wealth may not be enough for Nicky Scarfo.
Someone said, you should never make a poor man the boss, because he gets greedy and he loses sight of what it's about. I mean, Bruno saw himself, I think, as the caretaker of an institution. And he made plenty of money. But the idea was to ensure the continuation of the institution. Scarfo was just about, it's mine now, give me the money.
But money and success don't dampen Scarfo's appetite for violence. If anything, they increase it.
His reign becomes a reign of terror. Scarfo was like a Molotov cocktail. You never knew it was going to explode, and you never knew when it was going to explode in your presence, and you were going to be a victim.
Bruno ruled with an iron fist covered with a velvet glove. Scarfo saw no need for the glove. And where Bruno, murder was a negotiating tool of last resort, for Scarfo, murder was a calling card.
Scarfo enforces his street tax without mercy.
Every conflict was settled through the barrel of the gun.
A mob war that has left 18 men dead in the last 4 years.
This is what the Scarfo mob was about. This captures the cold-bloodedness of the Scarfo mob.
The body count keeps rising, and the fear escalates, permeating the streets of Philadelphia.
We went to Bobby Stone's jewelry store, but on our way to the store, Salvi said, let's go see this Enrico Riccobene. Let's go shake him up.
But Enrico Riccobene is no gangster. He's a legitimate jeweler.
So we go to his window in front of his store there, and we're banging on the window, and Salvi's yelling, open the door, we want to talk to you.
Riccobene is terrified and retreats to the back of the store.
So we didn't think nothing of it. About 10, 15 minutes went by. Oh, cops surrounded us, picked us up, took us in. I didn't know what was going on. Come to find out later on, the kid got so scared that we were banging on the window, wanting to talk to him. He blew his brains out. People were scared of us. Most of us were sons of made guys, so people were scared to death of us. Salvi said that we don't even have to kill these guys anymore, he was telling me. They'll kill themselves.
In the streets of Philadelphia in the 1980s, mob boss Nicky Scarfo grows angry with the popularity of one of his own captains. This man, Salvi Testa, the son of former boss Phil Testa. Scarfo and his gang are raking in millions, but money doesn't stop his paranoia about one of his own men.
Salvi Testa would be known as a real deal mobster. He was someone who was very loyal to Scarfo. Everyone else looked up to, they admired, somebody that they wanted to follow.
Leonetti and Salvi Testa were contemporaries. Salvi Testa's father was Chicken Man Testa, the underboss. Leonetti's uncle, father figure, was Scarfo, the consigliere. They came from the same place in that respect.
And Philip Testa was my uncle's best friend. And Philip Testa even told my uncle, if anything ever happens to me, please take care of my son.
But Salvi's high profile puts him squarely in Scarfo's crosshairs.
And the Wall Street Journal does a front page article calling him the Mafia Prince of Philadelphia. And they call him this charismatic, and he was a handsome young guy, stocky, well-built. The girls loved him. His father was the boss who had been killed. He had the bloodlines. Scarfo apparently went nuts. This guy, ultimately he's going to come after me. And Leonetti kept his mouth shut when all this was going on.
I didn't know what to do. He was my best friend, and we grew up together. I thought about killing my uncle. But I couldn't kill him because I just couldn't do it. I was like, I was just there.
But Scarfo issues the order, and that's all it takes.
Salvi knew, he felt the vibes. When we were saying goodbye, Chucky kissed Salvi, kissed him on the lips like the kiss of death.
Well, when it happened, what happened to you?
Well, I knew he was going to get killed. I couldn't do nothing about it. I just let it happen. Joey Punch drove him over to this store that was empty. When he went to go shake Wayne Grandy's hand, Joey Grandy shot him in the back of the head. I wanted to tell him, but he was not the type of kid, if I told him, he was going to run away. He was going to shoot it out. I did what I had to do because that's the way I was brought up. I thought I was doing something good, but that's how I am. That was my life.
I mean, his murder, I think, epitomized all that was wrong with the Scarfo organization. And again, it's not to say that any murder is ever right, but Salvi Testa literally put his life on the line for Scarfo when Scarfo became the boss.
The Salvatore Testa funeral procession arrived at St. Paul's Catholic Church in South Philadelphia shortly after 10 this morning.
Scarfo had a fatal flaw. His fatal flaw was a bloodlust. And that bloodlust psychopathically drove him and his decisions. And it was his decision to murder Salvi Testa that was really the breaking point.
Salvi Testa's murder sends a clear signal to everyone in the Philadelphia mob. No one is safe.
All the made guys, all the tough guys, all the gangsters are scared to death of what my uncle did, because they're saying if he could kill Salvi, who was like his son, we don't stand a chance here.
By 1984, everyone under Scarfo now begins fearing for their own safety.
Scarfo is a psychopath and he's paranoid. He's always worried about who's going to turn on him and who's going to come at him, because that's his mindset. You know, he's always, you got to kill somebody before they kill you.
After Testa's death, Scarfo shakes up the family structure, demoting even old friends like Chucky Merlino.
He had a meeting, he took Chucky down as underboss, and he made me the underboss.
It was that wanton, unnecessary violence, the treachery, the turning on guys that had put their life on the line for you, all of that, which flied in the face of the whole Godfather Honor Society, all of that nonsense. Leonetti, like other members of that organization, realized he's taken us all over a cliff.
I lost faith in my uncle, and I lost faith in La Cosa Nostra because he was the boss. He didn't follow any of the rules that he wanted everybody else to follow.
Scarfo's bloodlust is bad enough, but things get worse when the law closes in on him and his gang. By the mid-1980s, the walls are closing in on Philly mob boss Little Nicky Scarfo. First, he starts killing any of his gang he can't trust. And then the law starts arresting the others.
Nick Caramandi, who was friendly with my uncle, who was a con man. So he wound up getting in trouble. He wound up taking a fall and getting indicted. And he knew my uncle was mad at him. And he thought my uncle was going to kill him.
So from prison, he calls the FBI. Virtually the same time, Tommy Del Giorno is being told by the New Jersey State Police, you got this problem. He flips.
Now 2 Scarfo family members have turned, increasing the heat on the boss, Little Nicky.
He is the only one who can okay the crime of murder, Del Giorno said, and went on to list 14 hits ordered by his boss.
All the law enforcement agencies never had a mobster become a government witness. We now did. We had it because the 2 individuals felt that they had become sideways with Scarfo. So the choice isn't so hard then to become a government witness.
In 1986, the Justice Department indicts Scarfo and most of his leadership on charges of conspiracy and murder.
The enterprise was known as the Bruno family and then the Scarfo family of La Casa Nostra, this thing of ours. The indictment charges not only Nicodemo Scarfo and Philip Leonetti, but several other individuals.
This was going to be the last time that we would be able to go in and prosecute Scarfo. And this time, the setting was not only Scarfo, it was all his mob members. It was the capos, it was the soldiers. We had 17 defendants in the courtroom, 17 lawyers. This time, law enforcement truly not only was energized, it was galvanized.
Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo has reigned over Philadelphia and Atlantic City as one of the nation's most violent mafia bosses. But the reputed Scarfo crime family may be about to crumble from within.
I'm praying, I said, I hope I beat this case. I'll get out of here and get away from him. And if I don't beat it, I'm going to get my family, my kid, out of here. I'll call the feds up and start cooperating.
State of New Jersey versus Nicodemo Scarfo, Philip Leonetti.
and others. I'll ask counsel first to please enter their appearances.
We would waive a reading of the indictment. Simply enter pleas of not guilty.
After a 2-month trial, Scarfo, Leonetti, and 15 other members of the Philadelphia mob are convicted on racketeering charges in November 1988.
I was charged, I believe, with 4 murders, extortions, gambling, beatings. I was facing 45 years.
And at that point where he got 45 years, he decided to cooperate.
And I remember on a Sunday, I get a call from another reporter who covers federal court, and she says to me, Leonetti has flipped.
My decision to cooperate was a very, very hard decision, even though I was so disgusted with my uncle. But it was a decision I wanted to make. I didn't want my son to grow up in this environment.
And I mean, that sent shockwaves. People in law enforcement couldn't believe it, number one. And people in the underworld were, you know, this is a guy who was inside the inner circle, you know, it was a circle within a circle kind of thing. He was there.
Leonetti was really, at that point, the highest ranking mob member ever to turn to become a government witness. On top of that, Leonetti was Scarfo's nephew. That made his cooperation then even more significant.
And as a witness, he was probably one of the most effective that I've ever seen.
In vivid detail, Leonetti describes the scene of the crime when he murders Vincent Falcone in cold blood. He makes clear that Scarfo is calling the shots.
I was watching TV and he was making swings. That's intended to take him unaware. Yes, sir. That's our license, of course. You also check the truth. Yes, sir. What did you say? Shoot him again. What did you do? Got him.
Leonetti's testimony does permanent damage to the Philadelphia mob, which never fully recovers. Scarfo himself is currently serving out a life sentence in a maximum security prison in North Carolina.
And Leonetti testified, and he ultimately had his sentence reduced to 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days.
And today, Leonetti's a free man with a family of his own.
I have a new life now. A lot of the guys that I was friendly with went away for 20, 30 years. But, you know, most of my friends, like Salvi, he's dead. Lawrence Merlino, he died. My uncle's still living, but he'll live forever until I get killed, until he kills me.
That's why Leonetti remains in the shadows. Even now, every day, he fears the possibility of his uncle's wrath in the form of an execution.
There's a contract out on my life. He wants to kill me, my family. My uncle knows a lot of people, especially in New York, and he can find help to have me killed. So I gotta be careful.
Law enforcement would not have been successful without Scarfo's commitment to violence. His decision to murder Salvi Testa was his Waterloo and the death knell for the Philadelphia mob family, and it was the death knell for omerta within the Philadelphia mob. Whatever relationships they have, those don't exist anymore. Whatever power they had doesn't exist anymore. They have been reduced to a street gang.
As the old mafia dies, so will more of its members.
It's a very bad time for the mob.
Leonetti's cooperation is the beginning of a domino effect within the 5 families of the New York mob. A sign that the old traditions of loyalty and secrecy of what's called omerta are giving way to the pressure of a newly invigorated Justice Department.
We have proven that La Cosa Nostra can be taken on, that the community can be protected.
A department which will use men like crazy Phil Leonetti to attack an entire generation of mobsters.
As the arrests continued, the FBI said it was the worst night ever for the mafia.
And it will serve as the death knell of New York's infamous 5 families.
Here's something to say, Tony. Thank you.
I need you to keep it clear. I suggest using, violence. Yes.
Greg Scarpa was a well-respected and feared member of the Colombo family. He'd done a lot of work for the family, work meaning hits. limousine driver used to take his daughter to school. And there was a point in time when the limo driver tried to assault his daughter. And Scarpa went out and gave the guy a pretty sound beating. And it wasn't enough for him. Shortly thereafter, the limo driver was shot to death, and his body was dumped on one of the streets of Brooklyn. Now, one day I asked him, I said, there was a body found in Brooklyn on such and such a street. And he smiled. He didn't say anything, but the smile told me he did the work. He knew I knew he did the work. None of my top echelon informants would ever tell me that they committed a murder. Indicate to me, maybe? Yes. Tell me they did it? No. So if you want the information on that secret society, how else are you going to get it? If you don't talk to killers, people that are criminals, there's no way you're going to get that information. I mean, you're going to get it from what? Your priest, your rabbi, the local deli guy? And that's not happening.
It's the early 1980s. The secret society known as La Cosa Nostra remains the most powerful organized crime force in the country, untouched by the law. Mob bosses brazenly gun down their own members, including other bosses, in the streets of New York City. Joe Colombo, Joe Gallo, Carmine Galante, Sonny Black Napolitano, Sonny Red Indelicato. Something has to give.
This is not just a group of individual criminals. It's not just individual crimes. It's not even just a conspiracy. This is a long-term, 30, 40, 50-year-old organized business. And the business is committing murder, committing extortion, committing gambling. But I always thought there were delusions of grandeur with these people. I mean, garbage. It's a really bad organization. And let's expose it and get rid of it.
These men are witnesses to that secret history, stepping out of the shadows to tell their stories firsthand. Some remain concealed for personal safety, fearful of an organization that has never truly been brought to justice. But the arrival of this ambitious young prosecutor, Rudolph Giuliani, in the 1980s, marks the beginning of a crusade that would shake the mafia to its core. He knows the mob firsthand from the streets of Brooklyn.
My father would describe anybody who operated in a gang as a bully. If you need 2 or 3 men to fight your battles, you're not a real man, my father. A real man can fight his own battles.
By the time he becomes the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York in 1983, Giuliani sees the mafia as his battle.
It was very, very helpful that an Italian-American was doing this. I realized that I could play a unique role, that my name helped to be able to deal with this more honestly. I thought I could just say the truth. There is a mafia. It does exist. Italian-Americans are the exclusive members of it. It's a disgrace to Italian-Americans. It's a disgrace to America. And the best thing for us to do is wipe it out. No criminal organization in the history of our country has ever infiltrated legitimate institutions of society, including our political institutions, the way the mafia was able to do. This was tremendous power.
In order to bring down that power, Giuliani must target the leadership of the mafia. A handful of men known collectively as the Commission, the bosses of the 5 New York crime families. Gambino, Colombo, Bonanno, Genovese, and Lucchese.
The New York Commission truly governed the 5 families in New York City and had very specific powers.
The Commission is like our Supreme Court.
It's like the board of directors of a company.
The Commission was the body that was supposed to resolve all disputes among the 5 families, settle grievances, decide whether to authorize murders, and divide the booty. I think it's fair to say that they were trying to keep the peace.
If the Bonanno family wanted to kill somebody in the Genovese family, then that had to go to the Commission. And there had to be a vote on it. It was a business.
Key to that business is a code of silence, a code that has been in place for 5 decades. But in 1983, the legendary retired boss of the Bonanno family, Joe Bonanno, flagrantly breaks that tradition and publishes this tell-all book, Man of Honor. Giuliani reads that book and recognizes instantly what Bonanno has given him. an unintended roadmap to the inner workings of the commission.
It was a Saturday afternoon, I'll never forget it, and I was reading Joe Bonanno's book. I thought it was really strange that he'd write this book because he had an awful lot of information in it.
You have Joe Bonanno, one of the heads of the original families, calling himself a man of honor and discussing the mob in the book.
Bonanno's book, Man of Honor, actually lays out the history of the mob. It goes way back over the decades.
And as I'm reading it, all of a sudden it just snapped in my mind. He is describing a perfect RICO enterprise.
RICO, a law that's been on the books since 1970 and will become Giuliani's most powerful weapon in the government's fight against the mafia. It stands for racketeer-influenced, corrupt organizations. And at the heart of this statute is an elegantly simple idea. Taking on the mob isn't about taking down one criminal. It's about targeting the entire enterprise.
Organized crime is a group. Some of them are out doing the bad activity, some of them are on trial, some of them are on prison, and some of them are being recruited. It's a merry-go-round. And if all you do is take individuals off the merry-go-round, you have no impact on the merry-go-round.
The term racketeering is a catch-all that describes all of the mob's illegal activities, from extortion and loan sharking to union infiltration and murder. But rather than tying these crimes to an individual mobster, RICO ties them to a corrupt organization, in this case, an organized crime family. If prosecutors can prove the head of this organization, the boss of the family, is aware of and sanctions the street-level crimes, they'll finally have the ability to go after him.
You don't just put them in jail, you take their property away from them. You take away from them their bank accounts. You take away from them the restaurants they own. You take away from them the unions they control.
RICO was a major change in how you tried cases and thought about cases.
Investigators can start thinking about, for the first time, what the organization looked like, how it was structured, who ran it, who conducted what criminal activities, and then tie all those criminal activities together in one indictment.
For the first time, if you proved that a boss knew anything about this ongoing enterprise, they could get a life sentence.
Although RICO's been on the books for over a decade, no one figures out how to use it against the mafia until Giuliani reads Joe Bonanno's tell-all book.
I'm reading it, and then he got this big chart, and that shows the succession of the commission. What we should do is we should take that chart, which ended about 1966, and then we should take it and we should bring it to 1983, and we should fill in the line of succession. If we fill in the line of succession, I now have a perfect racketeering case.
But to fill in that 17-year gap and go after the commission, Giuliani must first build an elite team, starting with this prosecutor.
I was approached about working with Giuliani on putting together a case and was going to be focused on the bosses of the 5 La Cosa Nostra families that dominate the mafia in the United States of America.
And Michael was a young, new assistant U.S. attorney. We went down to Washington, and we asked to meet with the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI, Bill West. We went down there and gave him a briefing. And we had made this big chart. This is the evidence we have now. And these are the things we have to fill in. So we had a plan for how we were going to do that. And if we take out the commission of the mafia, we blow a hole right in their heart. And it was a case, frankly, that a lot of people thought we couldn't win.
In 1983, U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani embarks on a mission, take down the American mob. He goes to Washington, D.C. and asks for full backing from the Justice Department.
I'm going to need 50 or 60 more agents. I'm going to need more resources. I'm going to need really good tech people that may have to come over from the national security side.
His plan is to strike the head of the beast, the Commission, the mafia's ruling body which presides over an army of violent gangsters. Step 1, find out how the organization really works.
We reorganized the office so that we would be able to investigate specifically one family at a time.
Even with the reorganization, information about the leadership is hard to come by. But the feds do have one ace up their sleeve. The intel gleaned by FBI agent Joe Pistone during his 4-year infiltration of the Bonanno family under the alias Donnie Brasco. His inside knowledge provides law enforcement with its first detailed blueprint of Cosa Nostra.
Pistone's infiltration was a massive breakthrough in terms of gathering names, identities, who really controls what area. Some guy that you might suspect was a big deal because he was acting like a big deal really wasn't. Some other guy really was the guy calling the shots.
And Pistone gave you that?
Pistone gave us a real leg up on that. He broke the mystique that you couldn't infiltrate the mafia. That mystique was very, very important in getting people to cooperate. It makes the hand shake a little. And it gives you a chance to start turning them, getting more information.
This leads to step 2 in Giuliani's prosecution of the commission, flipping made members of the mob to become paid informants for the government.
The most powerful tool that the government has against organized crime is a cooperating witness, a rat.
And their motivation for doing that is, I guess, threefold. 1, to get money. 2, to curry favor with the investigators. And 3, to enhance their own positions of power in organized crime because they're only going to give information up against their rivals.
Law enforcement work requires infiltration. You can't do all of it through bugs because you don't know what to wiretap. You don't know what to bug. So that's why informants, they are the key.
And one FBI agent is particularly successful at turning mobsters into informants. This man, FBI agent Lynn DeVecchio.
What would be the opening conversation with a guy like this? What's the way in?
Well, what you want to do is to find him alone. You put him under surveillance, you see where he goes. And when you catch him alone somewhere, you stop him and talk to him. That's how he developed Gregory Scarpa.
That informant, Gregory Scarpa, will become arguably the most important of all paid informants in the case against the commission and the cornerstone in Giuliani's coming war.
Greg Scarpa Sr., Grim Reaper. Nobody called him that to his face. You know what I mean? He was called Greg, but behind his back, he was a Grim Reaper. That was his nickname because he was so vicious. I was in the credit card business with Greg Scarpa. I sit down and talk to him every day, and he would give me pointers where to go and use the credit cards. That's the type of guy he was. He was a mad hatter. God knows how many people he killed. He smiled at you, stick a knife right in your neck, but he smiled at you while you do it. He's a real friendly guy.
Greg Scarpa, he was a monster. He was a mad dog in the neighborhood. If he was walking on the same side as my sidewalk back in the day, I'd probably cross the street. That guy killed everything. Women, children, that guy killed everything.
He had previously been an informant for an agent by the name of Tony Villano and had been closed for a number of years. And I figured if he was an informant before, maybe he'll talk again. And I knew where he lived, and I went out there one day and parked my car. And I waited about half an hour just to see if anybody else was coming by. And if there were any wise guys going to his house, I would have gone back to the office. I saw him come out of the house. I got out of my car. And basically he said, what the do you want? And, you know, it's a good opening. And I told him, I said, my name's Lynn DeVecchio, I'm an FBI agent. And I said to him, I need an education. I need schooling in the life. I was a good friend of Tony Villano's. He told me before he died, if you ever need help from a guy, go see Greg. Tony never told me that, but that's what I had told Scarpa. And he said to me, let me think about it. You have a number where I can reach you. I gave him a confidential number. About 2 weeks later, he called me. Said, do you know who this is? I said, yeah, I know who this is. He said, meet me in my house tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Come alone. And the relationship started from there.
Soon, Scarpa starts to deliver the goods. One of his first tips turns out to be accurate and gruesome. The location of buried bodies, mob murder victims.
Well, the body that we exhumed in a social club in Brooklyn was Dominic Sciallo. Nicknamed Mimi Sciallo was the victim. Greg Scarpa, he didn't do that work, to the best of our knowledge. But he provided the names of the guys that did and where the body was buried. Mimi's body was buried in a shower curtain in the basement under a dirt floor. And actually below that, below him, there was another body that had been there for years and years. And I'm not sure the medical examiner ever identified that body.
The bodies confirm Scarpa's value to the FBI.
He'd keep us updated anytime somebody got made, somebody died, who was loan sharking, who was gambling. He had information on all 5 families.
Scarpa's tips lead to the next step in Giuliani's campaign against the commission.
Ability to do wiretaps and bugs. Without the informants that the FBI developed on the inside, we couldn't have done the wiretaps, we couldn't have done the bugs. I mean, that was vital.
The first target in the electronic assault, the Lucchese crime family, based in Harlem. They have a controlling interest in the New York garbage industry, to the tune of millions. Their boss is this guy, old school gangster, Tony Ducks Corallo.
Tony Ducks Corallo ran that family for many years.
He was arrested often, and somehow he managed to beat all these raps. He ducks everything. It's Tony Ducks.
But Tony Ducks has a weakness, a special fondness for an expensive set of wheels, his Jaguar, a tip given to the FBI by none other than Gregory Scarpa.
I'd asked Scarpa about where do they discuss things, and he happened to mention it. They talk about it in the Jaguar.
He was chauffeured around by a fellow by the name of Avellino.
We knew if we could get a bug in the car, there was no place for them to go. The conversations would be studio quality. It gave us a unique opportunity.
Scarpa furnished the probable cause for a judge to sign off on a Title III electronic intercept to put in that car.
Because we had physical surveillance on Avellino in the car for such a long period of time, we knew that it would be very difficult to do this. He was never far away from the car, and it would have been virtually impossible to do it where he parked the car at night. And so there was a short period of time we had to get it right the first time. We didn't want to be caught. If we were, we would never have the opportunity again. And the tech unit really practiced for this. They got a car that was the same, and then we essentially took it apart to figure out where we would get the best recording. They had to figure out how to get off the dashboard, how to install it, how to connect it.
The transmitter right on the bottom, he won't see anything.
And then they started to time themselves. So there would be practice runs, literally using a stopwatch, installing it, connecting it to the battery, reinstalling everything, getting out, and not leaving anything behind.
Good, good. You got it?
And then, once we get it down to the time, we now look for the opportunity to put it in.
It's March 1983, and agents are poised for action. For the right moment to plant a bug inside the Jaguar of Lucchese family boss, Tony Ducks Corallo.
We saw him pull in, we saw where he parked, we saw him go into the location, and then the tech unit began to do its thing. And then they went in, the stopwatch went again. They had plastic because they had to make sure that no drop of rain got into the car. And the pressure was not only getting the bug in on time, but ensuring that there was no indication that they had ever been there. And we started instantaneously getting terrific recordings.
We have to think about it, that the life was good enough for you. If we really believe in it, why wouldn't we want our son? If I were a doctor, I would be saying to my son, since he's a little kid, you're going to be a doctor. If I was a lawyer, I would be looking for my son to be a lawyer. So they must feel that if this life is good enough for me, I want it for my son also. Otherwise, we're really saying that this life is no good for the bird, right?
Within a day or two, Corallo was in the car saying that he was the boss of the family.
Tom Mix Santoro is also in the Jaguar talking. He's the underboss of the Lucchese family, and the talk is all about commission business.
So you get a complete picture of what the Lucchese family is doing.
But the Lucchese family is only one of 3 key targets in the commission case. Prosecutor Rudolph Giuliani's effort to dismantle all 5 of the New York Mafia's families. Another, the Genovese family. In the face of the Genovese is this guy, Fat Tony Salerno.
Fat Tony Salerno was quite a character. Very, very powerful guy.
You got something to say, Tony? Thank you.
He was recruited at an early age as a real tough kid, a knee breaker, a jaw breaker.
The Genovese are major players in the ports, garbage hauling and labor unions, and yet their headquarters is this dive in Harlem. Fat Tony Salerno's down and dirty home base, now an FBI target.
Had this grungy, beat-up candy store / club up in in East Harlem.
So Fat Tony would come down to a social club in East Harlem. However, when he left, he would always leave his social club guarded 24 hours a day and night.
So the feds just can't go in through the front door.
On either side of the street, you know, there's 4-story buildings, and who knows what's looking out these windows? You know, and you got to go up to the front door, and you got to go through the lock.
Finally, over a Thanksgiving weekend, Fat Tony, out of the goodness of his heart, let his men off.
But the FBI still needs to overcome a major obstacle, getting inside.
We had to get underneath the club. It was filthy, a basement. One of my best technical agents, John Kravick, crawled his way into the basement. It was dark and muddy down there, and who knew what was in there? You know, you're operating with red light, pen lights, and they were drilling a hole up through the floor to get into Tony's little candy store. Rats in that basement the size of cats. And I'll never forget John calling me on the radio. I was out in the command car because one of these rats bit him in the back of the ankle. But we got away with it.
They were able to get in, wire the whole place, and it was a gold mine.
The FBI now have bugs planted in the Jaguar of Lucchese boss Tony Dux Corallo and the social club of Genovese boss Fat Tony Salerno. Just two in a growing network of surveillance blanketing the mob in New York City.
This is what I'm looking for, you see? Let's designate somebody for that office. You follow what I'm bringing up? Yeah. We want to put a delegation. That is our union. Not that it's Jimmy Brown's union, not that it's Paul Castellano's union. It's theirs and ours. Now, let's take somebody, let's take a son, a son-in-law, somebody, put them into the office. They got a job. Let's take somebody's daughter, whatever. She's the secretary. Let's staff it with our people.
We have 25 wiretaps or microphones, and we have 200 agents from the New York office, and we also had 100 detectives from the NYPD. So at any one given time, we had over 300 and some investigators working on these matters.
But the most challenging target of all is the Gambino family and its boss, Big Paul Castellano, who aspires to be the boss of all bosses.
The most powerful family was the Gambino crime family. Paul Castellano was the boss of the family in 1982.
You know, he was at the top of the family, and all that money was being kicked up to the boss, and he got a piece of it.
He was the brother-in-law and cousin of one very powerful man, Carlo Gambino, for whom the family was named.
He was a very sophisticated, almost business-like boss.
Paul Castellano, he wasn't really a mobster, he was more of a businessman. If it had to do with money, he probably saw out the whole family.
Paul Castellano was not a guy that was spoken very well about. You know, he was a legitimate guy, had no business being boss. You know, he backed in through his relationship with Carlo Gambino, so he always heard that stuff.
He was never a tough guy. He was just a guy who fell into it.
Castellano may be despised by some guys in the life, but he has a huge ego and the real estate to match.
Paul Castellano had this big mansion out on Staten Island.
Paul's mansion was called the White House, and he tried to run the family from the house.
Now here he builds himself this mansion, which he deliberately names the White House because he passes the word along that he is as important a sovereign, a leader, as a president of the United States.
The only way for law enforcement to get inside the White House is electronic surveillance.
Bruce Mao was the head of the Gambino squad, and it was Mao who came to us and said, let's see if we can get a bug into Paul Castellano's home. They knew from their informants, they knew from their physical surveillance that many significant players in the Gambino family, and indeed other families, were going up to the Hill to meet with Castellano.
That was a fortress, that place, with locks and alarms and cleaning people coming and going. It was virtually never empty. We spent weeks trying to figure out when the best opportunity was. And there really wasn't a good opportunity.
But if it wants to nail the commission, the FBI has to figure out a way inside the Mafia's White House.
I could give you guys $500,000 a year without a problem.
In 1983, the United States government, led by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani, launches an all-out assault on the ruling body of the American mob, known as the Commission. Now comes the biggest electronic coup of them all. The FBI plants a bug at the heart of the beast, inside the impenetrable White House of Gambino family boss, Big Paul Castellano.
And we basically put the microphone in right in front of him. You can only imagine how we did that, because I'm not going to tell you.
But some say this is how they did it.
They damaged from the outside his cable TV. And they sent over somebody, 2 agents, masquerading as technicians, to repair his cable TV. They bugged his telephone and they planted bugs in the baseboards of his rooms.
I went over to the FBI site where they were doing the monitoring at Paul Castellano's house when we had the bug in there, and it was the first day we were up. And I said, wow, this is going to be incredible. I'm going to hear them talking about planning murders and controlling labor unions. And what did I hear? They were talking about what was better, Beck's or Heineken, what they had for dinner last night, where they were going to go for dinner the next night. Paul Castellano was constantly talking about his grandchildren. And then they'd hit a gold mine. Then they'd get stuff that was really significant, and you'd get Castellano talking about how they controlled the garment center and how they were involved in all sorts of significant racketeering activity.
At that point now, we had 3 or 4 simultaneous bugs. Corralo's Jaguar, Castellano's Study, and Fat Tony's Social Club.
To make some examples, other people ain't like us, they talk a lot.
With the help of those bugs, all the pieces of the commission case start to come together.
So you'll get one version in the Jaguar and the other version in the Social Club, and you put them together, and that gives you a kind of a multifaceted view of a particular criminal activity.
The bugs offer unmistakable proof of the extent of mafia commission power.
The tape recordings has them planning murders, dividing up routes for garbage collection, dividing up restaurants, dividing up the garment industry. All of this was on tape.
We now knew the entire structure of the family. We were working with the Senate Judiciary Committee that was doing an investigation of organized crime at the top, and we gave them essentially an organizational chart. There was testimony at the congressional hearing about this, and it was reported in the New York Post the following day. Corralo was having a conversation with Avellino, looking at the paper, and he said, you know, is the structure of the family.
And the street boss representing the Colombo family, whose boss is already in jail.
That was prime evidence of showing there is a commission. Here these guys are. They're meeting at this house surreptitiously, and we got them all on film.
On tape, the mobsters of the 5 families now confirm what Joe Bonanno has written in his tell-all book. And now, even more incredibly, he goes on television.
One of the most infamous crime bosses of all time, Joseph Bonanno, agreed to sit down with us, the commission. They sit around, they say, okay, that man's going to go. We're not going to do it.
No, the commissioner will never say that. The commissioner has nothing to do this.
I'm wrong?
When he went on 60 Minutes, and he talked about the structure of the mafia and the structure of the commission, the mobsters watched it. And we actually had recorded conversations where Corralo and Santoro, and they would say, did you see the 60 Minutes show? And did you see what Bonanno said? And then they would say, well, he lied about this, but he told the truth about this, and this is right, and that's wrong.
So that means he was even saying about a commission. He was admitting that there was a commission. He did. And like was saying, on the TV, he didn't call it. He just says, I'm a father of a family.
We were actually able to then use some of what Bonanno said against these mobsters because they had incorporated his television appearance into their own conversation.
It's a landmark piece of evidence that establishes once and for all that the commission exists. Meanwhile, the wiretaps and bugs are making clear that the commission bosses have their differences.
So these guys would finish a meeting of the commission, and they go back to their various haunts, right? Corralo would get into the Jaguar immediately, and he'd tell his driver, hey, we had a rough meeting today. Fat Tony was being a jerk. He's always a jerk. Remember that vote 2 years ago? It came up again, that vote to kill so-and-so 2 years ago. Persico's still complaining. He voted against it, and everybody else voted for it, and what a mistake that was. Then you would get Castellano's version of that, when he returned home to his study, he'd bring all his men in, and he'd say, "That idiot Corallo's objecting. He's bringing up that murder of 2 years ago. Who wants to talk about that damn murder of 2 years ago?"
But now the U.S. attorney from Brooklyn must prove his case against the core leadership of the American mob in court, something no prosecutor has ever done. It's 1985, and after a 2-year campaign of electronic surveillance and eavesdropping on the mafia's big families, U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani is ready to strike. He's set to take his case against the mob's ruling body, the Commission, to court. He chooses this man, Michael Chertoff, as lead prosecutor.
It would be fair to say there was a lot of pressure to bring this off without a hitch.
Michael was a young, new assistant U.S. attorney. I assigned him to work on the case with me. We developed the case together for 2.5, 3 years.
We had to do a job that was unimpeachable, meaning not only that we had to collect sufficient evidence to convict, but we'd have to do it in a way that wouldn't be subject to being overturned.
It's the most ambitious, far-reaching case against the mob in American history, the culmination of years of law enforcement work. From the infiltration of the Bonanno family by undercover FBI agent Joe Pistone and the use of paid informants like Gregory the Grim Reaper Scarpa, to a network of wiretaps lacing the mafia's very homes and social clubs. On February 25th, 1985, it begins.
It had leaked out to the press that they were going to be indicted. And my boss came in and I said to Tom, I said, you know, we got a problem. I just got a call from the press office. They know about the indictments. We got to go.
Law enforcement indicts and arrests 9 members of the commission, including Gambino boss Big Paul Castellano, Lucchese boss Tony Ducks Corallo, and Genovese boss Fat Tony Salerno.
As the arrests continued, the FBI said it was the worst night ever for the mafia.
For the first time in history, the ruling body of the mob, the commission itself, will be dragged out into the harsh light of a federal courtroom.
I went to the arraignment with the case agent and sat in the middle of the courtroom, just he and I. And as they brought these guys in cuffs, and I just sat there and I just said, this is a dream. I called Bob Blakey. I said, Bob, got news for you. We did it. Did what? He said. I said, we got an indictment of the commission of La Cosa Nostra. We did it, Bob.
Now, all of a sudden, in the United States federal courtroom, there was an indictment that charged all these people with all these things. They laid out for all the world to see and hear what the FBI had come to know, including the existence of the commission.
The RICO statute will now be put to the ultimate test. But can the law really work against a previously untouchable criminal enterprise?
What the RICO statute allowed us to do is to, first of all, categorize it correctly. This is a long-term organized business. The business of committing extortion, committing loan sharking, committing murder.
First time I heard about the RICO Act was during the commission trial, and that's when Rudolph Giuliani learned how to use it and started using the RICO Act.
Well, we knew this was going to be a historic case. And this offensive in its totality was designed to break the economic power of the mob and really send them back to what they were when they were essentially street gangs.
They called them the Underworld's Board of Directors, members of a 26-family mafia commission controlling much of America's organized crime.
Any comment at all about the charges?
But they were set free on high bail. And then the clock starts to tick.
It ticks down to bloodshed. On December 16th, 1985, 10 months after his indictment, Gambino boss Paul Castellano, the boss of all bosses, is assassinated.
They killed him. They killed him right in Midtown Manhattan, him and Tommy Bilotti.
He was killed over at Sparks Steakhouse.
A black Lincoln Continental pulled up to the door of Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th
Tentative identification is that it's Paul Castellano and Tom Bilotti.
I get a call from one of the FBI agents who was working on the commission case saying Paul Castellano just got killed.
We got the call, and I sent out a couple agents.
They told me that Castellano had been executed.
When I get there, Castellano's body is laying right under the awning in front of Sparks Restaurant.
At first, it's not entirely clear who pulled off the monster hit.
Are there any eyewitnesses?
Well, we haven't come up with anybody that is volunteering anything at this point.
I think 3 or 4 saw something substantive. Because everybody else knew there's a mob hit. I didn't see nothing. I don't want to get involved.
The major part of that commission case was the extortion of the cement business. So when Castellano fell, when he was shot, his head was right above this wet cement, and I thought it was rather appropriate at the time. He died right there in the cement.
So my reaction is, well, all the work on Castellano is gone because he's not going to go to trial.
But the other bosses will. Brought to justice at last in the mafia trial of the century. For the first time in history, the bosses of the 5 families of the American mob face their worst nightmare, prosecution in the public eye. But before the trial even begins, one of them, Big Paul Castellano, is assassinated in Midtown Manhattan in December of 1985.
I saw it as, boy, we're really getting to them. I mean, they're really under tremendous pressure now. When they start killing bosses, we must have them on the run.
But Castellano's murder doesn't stop Giuliani's prosecution of the other bosses.
I didn't see it as a setback. I didn't see it as a particular advantage. I would have liked Castellano around because when you have the boss, it helps the prosecution of the rest of the case. But then we had so much evidence, it really didn't matter.
In September 1986, 10 months after the Castellano hit, the case at last goes to trial.
Well, you know, you're in a giant courtroom, the ceremonial courtroom in the U.S. courthouse in downtown Manhattan. So it's a very large courtroom, very ornate. The gallery is packed with people watching. These defendants, they have a kind of a business-like attitude, but it's clearly a very tense situation.
There were over 75 tapes played to the jury. There were photographs, there were videotapes played, so it was a vast amount of evidence. You know, it was truly overwhelming.
Now, as we're moving along to trial, we're continuing to investigate, and we're also collecting more physical evidence. We subsequently add additional figures to the case, of which the most notable is Carmine Persico, the boss of the Colombo family.
Carmine the Snake Persico makes the risky decision to represent himself, a last-ditch attempt to escape the trap, now closing on all the bosses.
Defend yourself, you have a fool for a client is the time-worn legal adage. And Persico, I mean, I couldn't believe he did that. I mean, first off, his vocabulary was you know, of what, maybe a 6th grader, and I'm giving him credit for that.
Giuliani and Chertoff's case against the commission encompasses a wide array of crime, but the centerpiece is murder. The infamous 1979 multiple shooting of Bonanno family boss Carmine Galante.
Galante was having lunch in the courtyard of an Italian restaurant in Brooklyn when 5 men entered with automatic rifles and shotguns and opened fire.
The trail of evidence goes back to the immediate aftermath of the crime, when the NYPD tracks down the getaway car shortly after Galante's murder.
We discovered that the car had been identified within a matter of an hour or so after the murder. They had taken fingerprints off the car, so we had to figure out who those fingerprints belonged to.
The fingerprints lead nowhere, but investigators also find palm prints, and those have a match. Known Bonanno captain, Anthony Indelicato.
And it turned out that the palm prints matched. There was a little bit of evidence that Joe Pistone, the undercover agent, had that members of the Bonanno family had killed Galante. And part of that was also proven by the existence of a videotape that had been taken in 1979, shortly after the murder, showing people who we believed to be the murderers going to meet with the underboss of the Gambino family and getting congratulated.
The palm print and surveillance are damning, but Giuliani and Chertoff also have a secret weapon to tie Galante's murder to the commission. Undercover agent Joe Pistone, a.k.a. Donnie Brasco, and he helped supply the motive.
Galante controlled all the importation of drugs into the U.S. for the mafia. And Galante wouldn't share with any of the other families. So the other families got together and they decided he's got to go.
The reason this murder was important in the case is because it was one of those relatively rare instances where you can actually tie a murder to the commission itself.
With such a weight of evidence, the fate of the Mafia's board, the commission, is all but sealed.
The government called Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, Carmine Jr. Persico, and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno the board of directors of the Mafia. And today, after 6 days of deliberation, a New York jury agreed, finding them and 5 of their associates all guilty of running a racketeering and extortion enterprise.
We have now proven in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt, not only that there's a mafia, but that there's a commission, that it runs the mafia.
The commission case is the centerpiece of an all-out legal assault on the Mafia, an assault that includes cases against individual families, but perhaps most important, against labor unions.
And there we were able to expose it, bring it before a federal judge, have the federal judge throw everybody out of the Teamsters, throw everybody out of the Central States Pension Fund, let us bring in a monitor, and let us change the whole thing. For some reason, that's when I felt a sense that we've done our job now. I mean, now we have them in a situation where they can never quite reinvent themselves.
After decades in the dark, law enforcement has finally figured out how to fight Cosa Nostra. The RICO law ends an era in the history of the American mob, now fully visible for the first time.
First of all, ended the debate about the Mafia. We proved in court, beyond a reasonable doubt, that there is a Mafia. It took down all these people that supposedly were impregnable, the bosses. It created chaos in the organization. And chaos in an organization is a goldmine for law enforcement.
I know people don't like to give Giuliani credit for this, but he was the guy that used the statute effectively. No doubt about it. So yeah, I mean, it was eye-opening. I mean, there's all the bosses they can convict, they're gone. They ain't going away. I mean, this was a rumble throughout all the families. What happens now?
The sentences were handed down at the federal court in New York. The end of the trial here seen as historic.
And it brought them to a point where we exposed them for what they were.
The single most important campaign against America's organized crime syndicates for decades.
When the trial ends, of the original 9 members indicted in the commission case, 2 are dead. In the Gambino family, Paul Castellano from a hail of bullets, and Yellow Della Croce from cancer. Philip Rusty Rastelli of the Bonanno family receives a separate trial. The other 6 receive life in prison. Fat Tony Salerno of the Genovese family dies in a federal facility in 1992. And Tony Ducks Corallo follows him in 2000. Colombo boss Carmine the Snake Persico was sentenced to serve his 100 years in a North Carolina prison, where he still sits today. Wise guys keep working the angles, blood still spills in the streets. But Cosa Nostra is now a headless snake.
The mobsters call this the Holocaust, the hit of the century.
One ambitious gangster is poised to take advantage of the chaos. The most famous mobster of modern times.
He could kill somebody in 30 seconds.
John Gotti.
Unbelievable, the power that he had.
He was always on. He was bullet on.
We have now proven in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt, not only that there's a mafia, but that there's a commission, that it runs the mafia.
It is 1986, and the fortunes of the 5 families of the American mob are changing rapidly. For the first time in history, the United States government has successfully prosecuted the bosses of the ruling crime families, using state-of-the-art electronic wiretapping and a groundbreaking law called RICO to send most of the leadership away for life.
It was eye-opening. There's all the bosses they can convict, they're gone. They ain't going away. I mean, this was a rumble throughout all the families. What happens now, you know?
So it left a huge vacuum in command and control at the top levels of organized crime, and threw the families in disarray.
With the bosses in prison, the mob is a headless snake, and an era of chaos and murder erupts. One gangster sees this as an opportunity. This man, John Gotti, a captain in the Gambino family with a reputation for unbridled violence and vaulting ambition.
He was sort of an unknown wise guy, but Gotti would walk around with his chest out saying, one day I'm going to be the boss. Of course, we thought it was ridiculous.
Gotti will attempt to bring back the glory days to the 5 families of Cosa Nostra. These people are witnesses to a secret history, stepping out of the shadows to tell their story firsthand. A few stay hidden for personal safety, fearful of an organization that most Americans are now beginning to see in the 1980s as a threat to the health of the country and a very real tax on their everyday lives. The most successful of those families in this group, the Gambino family, a criminal powerhouse in the 80s.
The Gambino family was the largest family, and historically probably had been the most powerful family. It gets its name from Carlo Gambino, who was a boss of the family back in the 1950s. And it was probably the family that had the greatest wealth.
They were always very successful, and they didn't depend on just 1 or 2 crimes. They were into everything.
Loan sharking, gambling. The Gambinos had a lot of influence in the garment industry, with the unions.
In 1982, the Gambino boss is a guy named Big Paul Castellano.
Paul Castellano ran the family in a very different way from the way other bosses ran their families. He was a very sophisticated, almost business-like boss.
Paul's mansion was called the White House. They run the family from the house.
Captains trek from Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan to the White House in Staten Island to discuss business. And business is booming. Castellano controls much of everyday life in the city and gets a piece of the action whenever a New Yorker buys a chicken or rents an apartment. He has rules. One of them, no one in the Gambino family is allowed to sell drugs. And that's a serious problem for one of their captains, John Gotti.
In 1985, Gotti had most of his crew under indictment for narcotics trafficking. These guys were distributing 50 kilos of heroin in a 6-month period.
Under the rules of the La Cosa Nostra, you are not permitted to engage in narcotics trafficking.
But Gotti is flagrantly breaking that rule, and other bosses want Castellano to take action.
At that time, Chin Gigante of the Genovese family was putting pressure on Castellano. Gigante was telling Castellano that you're going to have to kill these guys.
Then, in 1985, Paul Castellano was indicted on charges of conspiracy and murder in the commission case. Gotti sees a one-of-a-kind chance to get rid of Big Paul and take over the Gambino family.
Their break came when they found out Castellano was having dinner on December 16th at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. So the hit team gets assembled, and Gotti is on the scene with Gravano. Gravano's driving. They have 4 shooters on the street. They have a couple of crash cars. They have a couple of getaway cars. There's probably 15 guys on the street. Bellotti and Castellano drive by. Gravano has a walkie-talkie, radios. They're coming. The car pulls in front of Sparks. The 4 shooters converge on him. They fire umpteen rounds, and they assassinate Castellano and Bellotti.
The dead godfather, Paul Castellano, and his bodyguard were gunned down as they stepped from their limousine outside a popular New York steakhouse.
Not for 50 years has New York seen a mob murder of this great a magnitude.
I think we're witnessing at least part of the changing of the guard. I think we're witnessing a convolution within La Cosa Nostra that hasn't been seen since its beginnings.
The mobsters call this the Holocaust, the hit of the century.
At first, it's not entirely clear who pulled off the monster hit.
Are there any eyewitnesses?
Well, we haven't come up with anybody that is volunteering anything at this point.
I think 3 or 4 saw something substantive. Because everybody else knew there's a mob hit. I didn't see nothing, I don't want to get involved.
But some within Cosa Nostra make an educated guess. Gotti.
Gotti knew if he didn't kill him, that he would be killed. And he knew that. After killing him, he would take over the family.
About a month later, they had what they call a captain's meeting for the Gambino family. So at which time the captains elect the new boss of the family. And Frank DeCicco says, I nominate John Gotti. Everybody in favor raises their hand, says aye, he's elected the boss of the family. John says, I nominate Frank DeCicco to be the underboss, and we have a new administration in the family.
By taking out Paul Castellano, Gotti establishes himself as the brashest, boldest captain ever.
He just went and did it openly and audaciously, and went to all the other captains, said, hey, I'm the boss now. And that was it.
He had a
particular magnetic personality that I hadn't encountered before in my life.
He went from a wannabe wise guy to a superstar within the mob, a mob star.
Hey, tell me about it.
Instantly, he became a media sensation.
Fellas always have a lot of film.
John is really the first boss to actually court reporters and court publicity.
All of a sudden, you start seeing his pictures, $3,000 suits, and walking around smiling for the cameras. And, you know, we've been in this life since we're kids. We know we're supposed to stay low, not smile for the cameras and say, hey, how you doing?
He was very fashionable. He wore tailored suits and tailored overcoats and, you know, fancy scarf, and, you know, he walked with a swagger. And so he took on the name the Dapper Don, and I'm sure he relished in that.
I always thought that Dapper Don was a basic moron. This guy who, you know, likes to show up to watch murders. Last thing in the world you do is show up to watch a murder. Last thing in the world you do is bring attention to yourself.
I think a lot of people resented Gotti of who he was. He was just so out there. He'll do the unexpected and doesn't care.
He was always on. He was bullet on.
Gotti swaggers in public, but inside the American mob, his enemies are massing for a counterattack. The hit on Castellano was not sanctioned by the commission, the governing board of the 5 families, and therefore must be punished by death.
2 particular factions of local organized crime were particularly riled about the fact that it was an unsanctioned hit, particularly the Lucchese crime family, where Anthony Casso was the underboss, and the Genovese crime family, where Vincent the Chin Gigante was the boss.
Vincent Chin Gigante was a close pal of Big Paul. They were involved in many underworld deals together, $1 million deals. Gigante decided that Gotti had to be killed.
Genovese boss Vincent the Chin Gigante is the polar opposite of Gotti, a boss who shuns the limelight.
The Genovese crime family is the Ivy League of the 5 families. They're very intelligent, very sophisticated, and that they get it. They know. They understand how it's supposed to operate. You don't want to tangle with these guys.
Gotti loves headlines, but the Genovese keep their leadership top secret.
The longest time, the Genoveses never made it clear who the boss was. It was like bait and switch. They would prop somebody up as he's the boss, but he wasn't really the boss. They played that game of chess with law enforcement, and I think with other crime families. Their business was their business. Nobody else needed to know anything about it. Gigante epitomized that.
Chin Gigante was the boss of the Genovese family for a number of years, and what his MO was to play insane. He was crazy.
They ain't gonna answer you. You don't understand.
His doctors say the man in pajamas is mentally ill. Not a godfather, but a man with the mind of a child.
He had a routine. Law enforcement members sometimes called it the Gigante Shuffle, but he would dress down in sometimes pajamas, always a tattered bathrobe.
His theory was if he got arrested, he'd get off by insanity defense, which he tried several times, and it worked.
You know, everybody has a little game, and he played a game as the odd father. Fascinating. Running around New York City with a robe on like he's a half a bubble off or a crispy critter. But in fact, he was a very astute, streetwise gangster.
He was no pushover. When he had to order his guys to go out and kill, he would order his guys to go out and kill.
But the Genovese boss doesn't take direct action. Instead, Gigante gives the job of taking out Gotti to another of New York's 5 mob families, the Lucchese family. Specifically this man, Anthony Gaspipe Casso.
Anthony Gaspipe Casso was the underboss of the Lucchese crime family. He was a particularly ruthless individual, feared by his own associates and by competing members of other crime families.
Gaspipe's reputation was, Gaspipe would have a dream that a guy was a rat and a foreman, and he would send out a crew to kill him.
Gaspipe Casso goes after Gotti in an unexpected way.
From what I understand, they were trying to kill John Gotti and Frankie DeCicco that day. So they wind up planting a bomb under Frankie DeCicco's car on 86th Street when he was at the club. John Gotti never showed up that day.
But DeCicco does.
They blew up DeCicco's car with him in it. I guess there was like a remote bomb they pulled off, so they went high-tech.
Gambino underboss Frank DeCicco dies instantly, and now Gotti vows revenge. An all-out war is about to erupt in the American mob. In In 1986, Gambino boss John Gotti narrowly escapes a hit. Retaliation for the unsanctioned murder of his former boss, Big Paul Castellano. What happens next is murky, a matter of dispute in law enforcement. Some say Gotti knows who tried to kill him and now strikes back with a vengeance.
It was clear that Casso had his hand in planning that event, possibly was present for the detonation of the device that actually went off and blew up the vehicle. And as a result, the Gambinos were intent on getting even with Casso.
Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the ferocious underboss of the rival Lucchese family. The Gambinos set up an ambush using Casso's relative.
Casso receives a telephone call from a nephew of his and is told that the nephew had set up a meeting where Casso would be able to take advantage of a scheme to cash stolen checks. And Casso is interested in attending that meeting, responds to a predetermined location, and is actually sitting in his car having an ice cream when two cars pull up alongside of him and begin to fire at him from multiple angles.
They only wound Casso.
He's able to slide out the driver's side and crawl into a restaurant, goes down into the basement of the restaurant and locks himself in a freezer, waiting for his assailants to vacate the area.
Casso survives, and now it's his turn to strike back.
Casso was convinced that the attempt on his life had come from within the Gambino crime family, but he needed proof. He also was hell-bent on identifying the individuals involved and exacting his own revenge.
Enter a small-time criminal named Burt Kaplan, a guy with connections in unlikely places, like the New York City Police Department.
That was when Burt Kaplan approached Casso and told him that he could reach out to two detectives that he knew, two detectives who had already done some work for Kaplan that Kaplan was very satisfied with, and that he could not only identify the individuals involved, but provide specific information as to their whereabouts.
Kaplan introduces Casso to two New York City police detectives, Steve Caracappa and Lou Ippolito, cops who are willing to do dirty work for extra pay.
Steve Caracappa worked with Lou Ippolito in the Brooklyn Robbery Squad. They were partners together in the late 70s. The vast majority of people who worked with Ippolito knew that he was the son of a member of the Gambino crime family, and were always curious about how he ever wound up becoming a member of the New York City Police Department.
He was a gangster with a badge, basically. That's what he was. And he had a partner named Caracappa.
Stephen Caracappa was a detective in the organized crime homicide unit that was part of Major Crimes, a very prestigious unit of the New York City Police Department.
For a price, Caracappa and Ippolito supply a list to Gaspipe Casso. On it, the names of men rumored to be involved in the hit against him. One of those names is Jimmy Heidel.
Jimmy Heidel was a low-level mob associate, a street thug, a tough kid.
He was kind of a maniac, did a lot of bad things. He killed a lot of people. Somebody from the Gambino family, they offered Jimmy Heidel the world. They told him, go kill Gaspipe. But he told everybody. They told me to do this, I did this.
Casso wants revenge. He's searching desperately, high and wide, to find Jimmy Heidel. Heidel is now in hiding. He knows this is trouble. And so the message is sent through Burt Kaplan to Ippolito and Caracappa to find Heidel and to bring him back alive.
And an agreement is made wherein the detectives will abduct Heidel from the street and deliver him to Anthony Casso. The amount agreed upon was $30,000.
The cops use their resources at the NYPD to track down Heidel, but it's not long before they receive the perfect lead from Jimmy Heidel himself.
Heidel was to meet a capo in the Gambino crime family at Dyker Park in Brooklyn on this October day in 1986. And Heidel was concerned that something bad might come out of the meeting, so he actually contacted the 6-2 precinct. He contacted them, I believe, for his own protection. What he could have never dreamed or expected is that that information found itself into the hands of Detectives Ippolito and Caracappa, and they were at Dyker Park that day looking for him.
I was standing on a corner with Frank Heidel, Jimmy Heidel's brother. We were on 15th Avenue and 86th Street. He looked to the left, and there's Ippolito and Caracappa driving by. Frank Heidel says, I just seen them two scumbags by my house, and they must be looking to lock up my brother Jimmy.
They see him walking on the street, pull him over.
They kidnapped him and they brought him to gas pipe.
Casso takes Heidel to a home in Brooklyn, and he takes Heidel down to the basement of that building and commences to torture him while he extracts from him the people that were behind the murder attempt on his life.
He tortured him for hours. So Jimmy finally broke down and told him who sent him to kill him.
He gives up the name Eddie Leno, a captain in the Gambino organized crime family. Casso then kills him by shooting him numerous times. The body's never been found.
No one doubts Jimmy Heidel is dead, and his blood seals the deal between Casso and the New York City police detectives.
From then, the relationship is formed, and they're put on the payroll effectively and given money every month to collect information and have services provided by these two men.
Gaspipe now knows who tried to kill him. The path takes him to Gotti. The torture and murder of small-time hood Jimmy Heidel by the Lucchese boss Gaspipe Casso gives Casso the intel he's looking for. He now knows who tried to kill him. Gotti confidant and Gambino family captain Eddie Leno.
Casso's motive for the hit on Eddie Leno was twofold. Jimmy Heidel told Casso that Eddie Leno was aware of the contract on Casso's life. Additionally, he was perceived as someone very close to John Gotti, and if Casso was successful in exacting revenge for the Castellano murder on John Gotti, Leno would be someone that he would have to be worried about.
Gotti is a marked man for the unsanctioned murder of his boss, Big Paul Castellano, and those connected to Gotti, like Eddie Leno, are in the crosshairs as well. So Casso gives the job to kill Leno to the pair of New York City cops in his pocket, Steve Caracappa and Lou Eppolito. The price tag, $75,000.
Eddie Leno left the club on Avenue U. When he left, everybody seen Eppolito and Caracappa following him. So they thought he was just under surveillance.
They used their sirens to pull Eddie Leno over on the Belt Parkway. He stops the car. He thinks it's just a police stop. Maybe he was speeding, who knows.
They ask him if he's Frankie Leno, who happens to be a cousin of his, which distracts him momentarily, and then he's shot and killed.
And they leave him for dead, get in their police car, and drive away. The Eddie Leno hit is the first time that these two cops have actually executed someone for Anthony Casso and the Lucchese family. Here you have people who are entrusted with keeping law and order in your city participating in a gruesome, heinous crime. It's the dissolution of civilization at this point.
With two of John Gotti's close confidants now dead, the boss takes an unexpected step. He makes peace.
John Gotti was the type of guy that was very, very in tune, perceptive, intuitive on the street.
He decides it's time that the families stop fighting with each other, that peace is needed. And he and Gigante and the Lucchese leaders, including Gaspipe Casso, arrange to have a meeting. They forgive each other. Gigante claims he never tried to kill Gotti. Gotti accepts it, and the truce is arranged.
On the verge of assassination, Gotti saves his own skin, but law enforcement is still gunning for him.
John Gotti was a particularly slippery guy. He beat a lot of raps, a lot of state court indictments and challenges, hung juries, things like that.
He always found a way to intimidate witnesses. Somebody disappeared, it was reasonable doubt, you know, this kind of thing.
One such case is a conspiracy indictment including racketeering and murder, pulled together with flimsy evidence and testimony from known mob associates like Sal Polizzi.
What was it like to testify against Gotti?
Oh my gosh, I was a junkie for excitement. It was another rush. He was sitting 20 feet away from me. He took his hand, he put it under the table and made it like a gun. Said, I'm gonna get you. And I waved at him and I said, yeah, okay, right. And after about 2 days, then I start to get cross-examined by all these attorneys like Bruce Cutler.
Sal Polizzi was a lowlife, miscreant, criminal.
And he was a pugnacious type of a guy.
This is not the KGB. This is America.
He was real physical, energetic, loud. He was an actor.
When you build cases on rotten scoundrels, you expose these low-life witnesses for who they are.
And of course, he tore me up for days, and he said, "How do you describe yourself, Mr. Polizzi?" I says, "I lived an un-American life, but I've decided to completely change my life." And he looked at me and said, "That's never gonna happen. Once a criminal, always a criminal."
You are the people, and it's going to be now your turn to see through the poison and come back with the right decision. Something you can live with.
Well, when you put mobsters and con artists and crooks and thieves on the stand, you know, it doesn't take a genius to discredit.
We find him not guilty.
After the verdicts, John Gotti drove to his Mulberry Street headquarters, the Ravenite Social Club. He was greeted with cheers and hugs.
Everybody loved him. You know, all the people in New York loved him. They figured he was an underdog, and he was this great gregarious gangster, Teflon Don.
When Gotti isn't beating cases, he's holding court very publicly at his social club, the Ravenite.
The Ravenite, when I used to go, was chock full of activity.
All the maid guys would walk up and down the street there and sort of hold court.
It was a serious place for serious-minded men, and John loved it.
But the feds aren't just watching, they're listening as well. They plant a bug inside the Ravenite club where Gotti does all his wheeling and dealing. But there's a hitch.
It was much too noisy, too many people, a jukebox playing, and it was really a bad environment.
We just couldn't pick up these conversations. So based on that, we had to shut down our electronic surveillance in late 1988.
As you look back over the surveillance records, something jumped out at us, and that was that on a certain night, like clockwork, over the course of a couple of months, a little old Italian lady would come out the side door next to the Ravenite Social Club, and she'd come back 2 hours later at pretty much the same time. So we said, you know, what is this?
We learned from a high-level informant that there's an apartment up there, number 10, occupied by a widow, and they'd go up there and use her apartment for high-level meetings.
It's the break they've been waiting for.
The case agents got a new court order, and we made another entry and went upstairs and found this beautiful little apartment with a living room where they would have had to sit because there was no other place to sit in there. We knew that this was going to be a quiet environment. There was no radio in there. There was a television, but, you know, I think they felt extremely safe in there. It wasn't long after that I got this call from Kostler and then Bruce Mao jumping up and down in excitement because it was a gold mine. The first night that they got them, Gotti talked about pretty much everything that he was doing. He kind of reviewed all the different criminal activity going on in the family and who was good and who was bad, and who needed to be killed, and what he thought of his lawyer, and a whole host of things.
This is going to be a Cosa Nostra the way back. Be it an hour from now, be it tonight, or 100 years from now when I'm in jail, it's going to be a Cosa Nostra.
It was just some of the best we ever had.
You tell this punk, me, John Gotti, you're sever your head off.
It's a treasure trove of information in the FBI's effort to take down Gotti. For the first time, the Dapper Don may be in real trouble. It's 1990. The key mob bosses are in prison and chaos erupts among the five families. Gambino boss John Gotti ends one feud with the Genovese and Lucchese families, but now the Colombos are about to go to war with each other, with Colombo boss Carmine the Snake Persico calling the shots from behind bars.
After being given a sentence of 139 years, Carmine Persico was virtually in jail for life. He knew that.
Persico's first choice to run the Colombo family would be his son, Little Alley Boy Persico. But like his father, Little Alley Boy's in prison too, so Persico appoints another family member.
Vicarina was Junior Persico's cousin, and that's why Junior gave him the reins of the family, because I guess he trusted him.
But the head of the Gambino family, John Gotti, doesn't like the move and stirs up trouble.
John Gotti wanted another puppet, so he pumped Vicarina up to tell Junior that he was no longer the boss of the family.
Arena inducted a lot of men, and they owed their loyalty to him. And Arena said, it's good being the king. I don't want little alley boy to be the boss. I want to be the boss. So he asked the consigliere, who was Carmine Sessa, he said, I want you to go poll all the captains and find out what they think. And Sessa was smart enough not to do that because he knew if he'd done that, Persico would have probably had him whacked. So he got word back to Carmine Persico that Arena wants a vote taken from the capos that who's going to be the boss. And immediately Persico said, whack the guy, kill Arena. In June of 1991, 4 members of a Persico hit team went out to Arena's house to try to get an idea what his movements were so they could find an opportune time to kill him. And unfortunately for them, Arena spotted him.
Vic Arena had caught Carmine Sessa and a couple other guys laying on his house.
Nothing happens. They come back and report that they think they've been spotted. Arena tells his people, Persico people are trying to kill me.
Now in June 1991, the stage is set for a bloodbath.
The Colombo War started between 2 internal factions, the Persicos and the Arena faction.
Vic Arena targets one of the most dangerous men in the Colombo family for murder, Carmine Persico's chief enforcer, Greg Scarpa, known on the street as the Grim Reaper.
Greg Scarpa Sr., Grim Reaper. Nobody called him that to his face. You know what I mean? He was called Greg, but behind his back, he was a Grim Reaper. That was his nickname because he was so vicious.
He was probably one of the most violent members of organized crime in the history of New York. He took a particular delight in killing people.
If he could kill somebody, he'd be happy. If he could dig up a body and kill him all over again, yeah, that's definitely him.
He was a scary character, Greg Scarpa. Very scary character. That guy killed everything.
Scarpa's a part-time FBI informant, but he's still a gangster and about to be caught in the middle of a Colombo civil war.
November 18th, 1991, Greg Scarpa is going out of his house to get into his car to go somewhere. His daughter, Linda, and his granddaughter get into another car, and they're going up their street. At the end of the street, there's a van blocking the cars. He drives around the van, and guys jump out. And they miss him, and they fire at the car carrying Linda.
They bullet riddled that whole car.
They knew by that time they'd missed Scarpa, and they took off. Now, you attack an organized crime member, I don't know how anybody would not expect them to retaliate, especially when their family was involved.
But the feds don't want to lose their inside man and a law enforcement goldmine.
And I told him, I said, Greg, we've known each other for a long time. I know what you're going to do, and I said, I've got to tell you that if you retaliate, my guys are going to be out there, the police are going to be out there. If you get arrested, you know, that's the end of the game. You're arrested. Nothing I can do about it, nor will I. He said, it is what it is. You do what you got to do, I do what I got to do.
So 3 weeks later, Greg, the Grim Reaper Scarpa, looks for revenge against members of his own family.
Scarpa is out with 2 or 3 members of his guys, and they're driving around Brooklyn looking for targets of opportunity. It just happens to be in December. They drive past Vinnie Fusaro's house, and he's outside hanging Christmas lights. Scarpa shoots Fusaro, and the other guys open up on him. Fusaro is instantly killed in front of his house, hanging the Christmas tree lights. The next day after Fusaro gets killed, Black Sam Nastasi is in his social club. The Arena guys jump in there and kill him in the club as a retaliatory move for the killing of Fusaro the day before. They're shooting at each other, maybe on a weekly basis.
With the old guard gone, low-level gangsters are now battling for power, killing each other in a war over who will lead a new mafia.
Civil war within the Colombo family turns the streets of Brooklyn into a slaughterhouse.
The other families have never been through wars like the Colombos. I know quite a few people that got killed. The Colombos are known as the most violent.
It was a very treacherous time in New York City where they had to be on the defensive and on the offensive. And at the same time, law enforcement was trying to prevent the killing and bring them to justice.
There's no question there's a lot of tension out there. There's a lot of FBI agents, a lot of NYPD out looking around.
None of the other families were happy about it because it was bad for their business.
We'd be driving in the neighborhood and have nothing to do with the Colombo War, and they would pull me and other guys out of my car and strip search us in the middle of the street. They would tear the cars apart looking for guns.
If I had to go rob a bank and I had to have guns in the car so we can go rob a bank, or go steal a car so we can go rob a bank, we couldn't do that because there was too many cops in the neighborhood.
In the Colombo Wars, Greg Scarpa is playing on two teams, as a Colombo footman and an FBI informant.
In the meantime, Greg Scarpa is telling me what's going on. Not that he's killing people, he's not going to tell me that. But he's telling me other hit teams on the other side who were out there looking for people. And as a result of his information plus surveillances, we stopped a number of shootings. We found several locations where they had guns stored, where hit teams hung out, where they had lists of people they wanted to kill.
In other instances, we were accelerating cases that we had been building methodically to take them down prematurely just to take these people off the street and bring them to justice.
The feds close in on the two warring Colombo factions.
There were about 60-plus members of the Arena faction arrested, 60-plus members of the Persco faction arrested. Victor J. Arena was arrested, as was his underboss, Adamato, and they were convicted and each received life sentences.
Virtually the upper echelons of all of the families have been taken out in New York City. Entire crews and families have been taken out. It's a very bad time for the mob.
Eventually arrested as well as Greg the Grim Reaper Scarpa. In 1993, he receives a life sentence for committing multiple murders. He dies in prison a year later.
Carmine Persico still maintains the position as boss, and he will be until he dies the boss of the family. For a year and a half or more, closer to 2 years, the war went on with a total of 12 members and associates killed and 18 members, associates, and some innocent bystanders wounded. The Colombo War was one of the most bloody, if not the most bloody, internal wars in La Cosa Nostra in the United States in the 20th century.
It always comes back to control. You know, these internecine events like the Colombo Wars was really all about an individual attempting to wrestle control. The end result is that there really is no winner.
The Colombo Civil Wars bring that family down from within, but law enforcement's got another of the 5 families in its crosshairs, the Lucchese's and their underboss, Gaspipe Casso.
Gaspipe Casso is tipped off that a major indictment is coming down against him. And he's tipped off either by his undercover mafia cops, or he later claims he was also tipped off by somebody in the FBI. And for almost 2 years, he's on the lam.
But in the winter of 1993, FBI agents finally catch up with Casso at his girlfriend's home just across the bridge in Mount Olive, New Jersey. They arrest him on charges of murder and attempted murder.
Casso was arrested in 1993 and agrees to cooperate with the government sometime in 1994.
Now that he's starting to talk, he spills everything, including an unbelievable story about 2 New York City police detectives.
I had law enforcement on my payroll, so I had them looking after me.
Cops?
Yeah, the cops.
What were their names?
Lou Ippolito and Steve. Steve, I can't, he's got a long last name. Kappas.
Caracappa?
Yeah, Caracappa, whatever it is. I can't say it all the time, you know?
But Casso's past deeds are so horrific, the feds are having second thoughts about cutting him a deal.
It's my belief that the prevailing sentiment amongst federal prosecutors was that 36 or 37 murders was too much, and that maybe they had gone too far.
Casso's deal to cooperate with the government unravels, leaving NYPD detectives Ippolito and Caracappa untouched. The mafia cops seem literally to get away with murder.
Ippolito and Caracappa end up retiring from the police department. Louis Ippolito moves to Las Vegas. He writes a book called Mafia Cop, in which he sort of talks about his history being a New York City police officer, but having family members in the mafia. He goes on television, and Jimmy Heidel's mother just happens to be watching. She sees him and thinks, she recognizes this man. This is the man who came looking for her son years and years ago, the day he disappeared.
She immediately went out and bought a copy of Mafia Cop, and in it saw photographs of both Ippolito and Caracappa, and then was absolutely certain that these were the 2 people who were outside her house the day that her son Jimmy disappeared.
The mafia cops may have retired as hitmen, but they're not home free. When the mother of a former mob associate recognizes her son's killer, a former NYPD detective and Lucchese family enforcer plugging his book on television, she takes action that triggers another hard look at him and his partner.
She ends up contacting the New York City Police Department, and that restarts the investigation into Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, and ultimately leads to their indictment.
I was a very highly decorated cop. I worked very hard my whole life, and I just want the people to know that I'm not the person that they're portraying me.
I wouldn't do that. Put my life in jeopardy, disgrace the badge, take everything that I'd worked for my whole life and throw it away and kill somebody in the street like a cowboy. It's not my style, it's not me.
The verdict came back guilty on all counts.
Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa directly participated in and aided and abetted 11 murders and attempted murders.
Judge Weinstein gave them each a sentence of life imprisonment, and I believe that was the just sentence for the crimes they had committed.
Typically, there's like 2 or 3.
The mafia cops are the last act in the Lucchese family saga. But over in the Gambino empire, thanks to secretly placed bugs, the FBI is on the verge of taking down their biggest mobster yet, John Gotti.
On December 12, '89, we had what we call our smoking gun. Gotti was at a meeting earlier that day where some of the guys who were with him were complaining that they lost a big construction job to Sammy the Bull's company. So John was steaming, and when he's steaming, he doesn't care what he says.
Too often, these guys, they're not smart enough to realize they shouldn't be talking. They shouldn't be saying stuff. They think they're in a secure area, and they're not. The old-time guys wouldn't even talk on the phone.
So John goes a long tirade why they have to kill Louis DeBono, why they killed Robert DiBernardo, why they killed Louis Melito. He blamed Sammy the Bull Gravano for all 3. And just that one tape alone, we knew we had John. And on the night of December 11th, 1990, we arrested all of these guys. John Gotti, Frank Facasio, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Tommy Gambino at the Ravenite Social Club.
I was part of the task force that took him down, and we take him down in the street, and we throw him up against the plate glass window, and I put my hand around to toss him, and he's got what I thought was a gun. I said, "Are you packing?" And it turns out it was a big belt buckle that I thought was a gun. So I put him in the car, and he's going into the car, he turns to me, he goes, "I give you 3 to 1, I beat this."
After we made the arrests, we had what they call a detention hearing to prove these guys are a danger to the community. And so we played that 12-12-89 tape as one of the first ones.
The beauty of tapes is you can use them not only to make cases, but to turn guys. Or you can go to a guy and say, listen to what your boss is saying about you.
I've seen level 2.
And I'm watching Gotti sitting next to Gravano and Lucasio at the defense table.
Does one game with
of course, Gravano's never heard this before. And we start playing the tape, and
he was getting killed.
You hear Gotti calling Sammy a green-eyed little monster.
And Gotti begins
I've reset my character before.
musing over the fact that he doesn't trust Gravano.
It's a misnomer about
take him out.
because they might have done the same
Sammy's
thing.
ready to explode. John's wants to dive on the table. He's so embarrassed. And Sammy's, you just planted the seed for that guy. And that was the impetus later for him to cooperate and become a witness for us.
When I flipped in '84, they treated us like we was movie stars, the FBI. Guys didn't flip. That was like, oh my gosh, you got a guy to come over? That was like rare back then.
God damn it.
But around 85, 86, 87, guys were flipping every other day.
Among them, Phil Leonetti, a leading figure in the Philadelphia mob and the first underboss in the history of organized crime to cooperate with the United States government. He's the first of many dominoes to fall.
I cooperated, I ratted on everybody. That's something that I grew up not believing in and something that I wasn't supposed to do. But it was a decision I wanted to make.
Leonetti was really, at that point, the highest ranking mob member ever to turn to become a government witness.
And a lot of people say Gravano saw what happened to Leonetti, the kind of deal he got, and he decided that's the route he was going to take as well. In fact, Leonetti at one point was going to be a witness against Gotti, but once Gravano flipped, they didn't need him.
As part of my cooperation, I told the government about my life of crimes, including the fact that I participated in 19 murders. As a member of our family's administration, I helped John Gotti run the family.
The case went to a jury on April 1, and April 2nd they came back and they was convicted in all but one count. And that was a magnificent day for law enforcement.
After 4 tries, the mighty mob boss has been found guilty by a Brooklyn jury. He now faces life in prison.
Jesus,
he represented a rebel figure for people. He was a hoodlum, but he chose that life, or the life, as he said, chose him. And he seemed to be enjoying the show.
I got 44 left.
More over here, too. No, no,
Really led to the demise of the Gambino crime family. It enabled the FBI to gather evidence against the whole leadership of the family, all the powerful people in the family, and indeed other families.
Cooperating witness Sammy the Bull Gravano was the linchpin of the case. His testimony not only helps bring down Gotti of the Gambinos, but later Genovese family boss Vincent the Chin Gigante in 1997.
Gravano identified him as the head of the Genovese crime family. He testified Gigante wore the familiar pajamas and a bathrobe at their first mob meeting, but there was nothing unusual about his behavior.
For the first time in its 60-year history, the American mob is on the ropes, as high-ranking gangsters cooperate with the government and wise guys kill each other in the streets. But in the 1990s, one boss will bring back the glory days of the mafia. A legendary killer and hijacker named
He is like the last Don. All the other bosses.
While a new generation of street gangs emerges.
These kids.
But they become killers who turn the streets of Brooklyn red with blood.
I never left my house for a we were ready to go to war.
When I think back how much craziness was going on up there, it was like a shooting gallery up there.
Pop, 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 pop. Boom. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, Bensonhurst. The neighborhood is run by the Italian Mafia. One day, April 4th, my friend John Polio was murdered. The kid Michael Hamster was taking credit for his murder. Goes around the neighborhood that this kid's bragging that he killed John Polio. You know, so I wanted some more.
Well, 6 player.
I go to Joey Calco and Paulie Galino, and Paulie G gave us 380, me and Joey. And we go hunt for Michael Hamster. We see him get into Bobby DeChico's car. We follow him. He stops at a red light on 17th Avenue in Benson. He rolls down the window because he thinks he's a tough guy. And all of a sudden, Joey pulls out the pistol. And he starts unloading on him. Pop, 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 pop. The kid Michael Hamster is jumping one leg across the street, like hopping. The kid Joey Calco with the shotgun, boom, hits him and he falls. Joey hands me the gun, I put it down my pants. Joey takes off. As we're driving, there's a cop car. This is a true story. He pulls us over. You know, we're a little nervous. You know, I got a gun down my pants. You know, we just shot this kid 5 times. And all of a sudden on the cop's radio, we hear, man shot, 17th Benson. The cop goes like this, today's your lucky day. And he just takes off. Whew. He had us right there.
It's 1992 and most of the old bosses of the 5 families of Cosa Nostra are in prison. Fearing life sentences and payback from their own side, gangsters everywhere start cooperating with the United States government.
As part of my cooperation, I told the government about my life of crimes, including the fact that I participated in 19 murders.
Which leads to the takedown of the most famous boss of modern times, John Gotti. But the remnants of the 5 families remain loose on the streets, trying to rebuild on the ashes. And none is more determined and dangerous than the Bonanno family, which begins their ascent below law enforcement's radar. These people are witnesses to that secret history, stepping out of the shadows to tell their story firsthand. A few remain concealed for personal safety, fearful of an organization that even in the 1990s is fully capable of resurrecting itself, like the Bonanos.
I think it's fair to say that two events brought the Bonanno family to the edge of extinction. First, obviously, its boss was murdered, Carmine Galante. Famous image of him lying dead with a cigar still in his mouth. But at the same time, there was the Donnie Brasco infiltration and subsequent prosecution.
This operation really kicked the Bonanos in the arse. I mean, it kind of really decimated.
That was a huge blight on the Bonanno organized crime family. As a result, they were kicked off the commission. It was a major embarrassment.
The commission is the board of executives that oversees the 5 families of the mob: Gambino, Colombo, Lucchese, Genovese, and Bonanno. They call the shots, determining who lives and who dies. Ironically, the Bonanno family's expulsion from the commission turns out to be their big break.
The FBI and other law enforcement agencies moved on to other cases, so they didn't really keep a clamp on the guys that were left in the family.
The headlines were about the Gambinos and about the Luccheses and about the Genovese family and the internal war in the Colombo family.
You know, Gotti's gone, Castellano's gone. In the Colombo family, they're having a Colombo family war. The Genovese family, Fattoni is gone, he's been convicted. The Lucchese family is in total disarray. Chin Gigante is on the run, he's been indicted or about to be indicted.
These different problems within these families allow the Bonanos to continue to exist, to keep a lot of its turf, and for a period of time to fly low on the radar, to give it a chance to rebuild its infrastructure. And that's exactly what they did.
While Bonanno boss Joe Messina was in prison serving 6 years for racketeering, his subordinate, old-school gangster Anthony Spiro, takes over daily operations. Spiro is one of the last major mob figures still on the street, and a believer in traditional mafia values of secrecy, respect, and murder.
He had strong connections with the other families, and he had the respect of lower-level members.
He was a gentleman to law enforcement, and he was very well respected, you know, in the neighborhood.
He was known to host an extravagant fireworks show every year for members of the community.
But he was a lethal guy, and he would kill you.
He was a bit of an eccentric guy, though.
Come on, baby, come on.
He was very big into pigeon races and pigeon coops and whatever you do with pigeons.
They would fly in a big sweeping flock around the neighborhood and ultimately come right back home.
He's going like this. And all the pigeons are following, and you see them flying.
And if you think about it, it's almost just a metaphor for Spiro's criminal organization, where he's releasing not pigeons, but villains, murderers, thugs out on the streets, all for them to make money and to bring it back to him.
Spiro excels at taking children off the streets of his neighborhood and grooming them for a life of crime and violence. Kids like Jimmy Calandra, who grows up in the Bensonhurst neighborhood of Brooklyn in the 1980s, at a time when the mafia is fighting for its life against law enforcement, but still has the power and glamour to make a big impression on little boys. Calandra and his best friends are nothing but kids when they start their journey into the underworld.
The core group of my friends was Paulie Galino, Tommy Reynolds, Joey Calco, me, and Fabrizio Di Francischi. I mean, we were troubled kids in the neighborhood. We were big kids. You know, we decided to form a crew.
They got tattoos on their ankles to label themselves number 1 through number 7.
We were making a pact with each other. You know, we're all in the same crew together. You know, one for all for one.
The boys of Bath Avenue have each other's backs in a Brooklyn neighborhood steeped in the code of Cosa Nostra. All 5 families have a foothold here.
Bath Avenue was a known avenue for mob-related activity.
Bath Avenue was filled with social clubs. There was 3 on a block. You knew Who were the guys that were connected? Who were the guys that were up and coming?
You know, I was a young kid growing up around wise guys. The guys making the money. You know, every time they see us, you know, they give, here, here's 20. You know, as soon as I leave my house, I got $20. I go to the corner, I hang out. You know, what I gotta work for? We had Nick's Candy Store right around the corner from my apartment. That's where we would all come together.
You know, there was a group of guys on every other block. No matter what time, day and night, there was always somebody there. That corner was home base.
And we do errands for them. They would give us a couple of hours here. Go up the block and get me 2 French bread. Say they need someone's window broke, you know, throwing us the keys, here, go wash my car, whatever the case may be. You know they control the neighborhood, you know, with their walk-in talks in the neighborhood. You know who was who. You know, these were the guys that I looked up to.
Imagine that you are an 8-year-old boy in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn. Most of the men and women that you know are struggling to make ends meet. They're working their fingers to the bone. But what you see down the street at the social club are Cadillacs pulling up and men dressed in $500 suits getting in and out of the Cadillacs.
These men were my father figures. You know, if I needed anything, they just helped me. If we had a problem, we knew where to go.
These kids really did start as kids. Some of them were 8 or 9 years old when they first started running numbers at the social clubs.
Social clubs were really big. Gambling parlors, you know, were really big. They were bookmakers, and if you tried to use the payphone on a Sunday, they'd cut your hands off.
We do straight bets, we do parlays. We were gambling every football game, Sundays, everything. I was loaning out money. I was a little kid, I was maybe 13 years old. We thought we were somebody, you know, we were looking up to these guys and we actually thought we were doing something.
8 or 9, they're running numbers. 12, 13, 14, they're parking cars and hiding weapons and moving money, and they move up the ranks to do more violent and more profitable things.
As the Bath Avenue boys grow up, what starts with trips to the bakery ends in crime and violence.
You know, as we get older, we just got more dangerous. You know, so instead of boys, now we're just a crew.
It's now the 80s, the era of crack cocaine, a drug that ignites rampant street violence in New York City, and the Bath Avenue crew fits right in.
Bath Avenue crew, they would smoke drugs, rob drug dealers. Then they got into the drug business, started extorting drug dealers.
We were doing bookmaking. We had the cocaine business on beepers. We had the pop business. We were stealing cars. I was doing banks, I was doing burglaries.
They're out there earning, because being a good earner is a way to get in good graces, you know, by sending money up the ladder, getting some respect from some of the wise guys.
So the Bath Avenue crew was embraced by the Bonanno family as associates because they were good at their jobs. And the job of an associate is to earn money and to engage in violent acts when they're needed. And this group really excelled at both.
They were a gruesome bunch of guys.
Fabrizio Di Francisi, one of the most ruthless enforcers the group had, he took a blowtorch and literally tortured one crack dealer who was using product on the street. Tommy Reynolds, out of anger, picked up a fork and jabbed it in someone's eye. That's how violent these guys were.
They killed a lot of innocent people. They committed a double homicide for, I think, an 8-ball of cocaine.
They were doing exactly what associates had been doing, maybe more violently, but doing for many, many years.
We're Sparrow's muscle. I mean, if Sparrow needs something done, we are at his disposal.
The acting boss of the Bonanno family soon puts them to work.
Spiro had a daughter in the neighborhood. One day there was a drug addict named Vincent Bickelman. He broke into her house and stole a necklace.
After he stole it, he went to somewhere on 86th Street to sell it. It had Jill's name on the necklace. It said Jill. And it got back to Sparrow. He broke into a Bonanno boss's daughter's house.
Spiro went to Galeno to pass the order to kill Bickelman. And of course, Galino saw this as his opportunity to get inducted into the Bonanno family.
Paulie Galino was the leader of that group. Vicious guy.
He didn't give a He wasn't afraid of nobody. He was a ballsy kid. He was a tough kid. A lot of wise guys were afraid of him. That hit was given to us. Paulie just gave word to all of us. If you see this kid, this is what he looks like. Just, you know what I mean? Leave him where he is. A big opportunity for us.
In the 1990s, the 5 families of the American mob are a headless snake, struggling to recover from repeated assaults by law enforcement. But in the streets of Brooklyn, wild gangs like the Bath Avenue crew unleash a reckless new wave of violence. Violence that grabs the Bonanno family's attention. So when a thief inadvertently robs the daughter of Bonanno family crime boss Anthony Spiro, the Bath Avenue boys get the call.
It was a big opportunity for us. This was a very, very important piece of work to do for Anthony Spiro, because this was going to get Paulie Galino recognized and hopefully become a made member in the family.
You know there are certain rules to become a made guy. And one of them is you have to earn your button, you have to kill somebody.
One day, Paulie Galino was driving around. He saw the kid, and he runs up on the kid, Vincent Bickelman, right around the corner from the police station, right off the corner. He jumped out, and he just shot the kid 5 times. That's it, drop. We all went to the bar. Paulie told all of us what happened. We celebrated. We were drinking. We had a great time.
The Bickelman murder cements the Bath Avenue crew's reputation. It tells everyone on the street there's a new gang in town. Guys who are on their way to becoming made men in the Bonanno family.
They want people to know that they just killed this guy, because you're recognized now by made guys, by captains, that you're capable of doing things like that.
We ain't kids no more. You know, we're looking to, move up to the next level.
The members of the Bath Avenue crew want to join the Bonanno family at a crucial moment. Just as Joe Messino, the family boss, gets released from prison after serving 6 years for racketeering.
So Joe Messina gets out of prison, and all the other bosses have been convicted. They're replaced by underlings, people who are not that significant. So Joe comes out, and he is someone who is revered. He is like the last Don, the one well-respected boss.
Unlike a lot of organized crime members, Messina was very friendly, very affable.
Very jovial, beloved by members of his family.
He worked with John Gotti. They were close friends and close confidants in truck hijacking.
He's also one more made guy with a violent past, routinely ordering associates like Sal Polizzi to use their muscle.
The Bonanno family had a case running, and Joe Messino, who later became the boss, called Foxy and I and said, "Look, you got to do us a favor. There's a witness. You got to go beat this guy up. I want you to break his arms and legs, and to give a message, to give him a beating that he wouldn't testify." So we beat this guy up with bats, broke his arms and legs, only to find out he was the wrong guy. It was the father. And then when Messino called us in for a meeting, he said, "Look, you beat up the wrong guy, but it's okay. The witness disappeared anyway."
But Messino doesn't just subcontract his killing. He's done it himself. His claim to fame is as one of the shooters in the Three Capos murder, an infamous gangland massacre from the early 1980s.
3 captains wanted to take over the family. Sonny Redden Delicato, Phil Lucky Giacone, and Dominic Trinchera.
Messino goes to the commission. He then gets permission to go ahead and kill the 3 captains.
But when Messino gets out of prison in 1992 after 6 years, he's faced with a new reality. He needs to keep a low profile. He recognizes the mistakes of other bosses like John Gotti and Joe Colombo, who spent too much time in public or got caught on tape by electronic listening devices. So Messino reforms the Bonanno family, starting with his own extreme variation on that tried and true code of silence.
No one is allowed to say his name. Instead, he says anyone who wants to refer to the boss must just use the visual hand to the ear.
Just like Chin Gigante in the Genovese family, you had to touch your chin. Well, Joey was going to be called the ear.
Also, he did not go to weddings and funerals where people would be photographed.
He doesn't use a cell phone. He doesn't use a pager. He doesn't use his home phone.
He also takes the extreme measure of ending a decades-old tradition, closing down the places that were once the hub of all mob activity, social clubs.
For many, many years, I'm sure they thought they were invincible at social clubs. But we managed to bug a number of social clubs and overheard a lot of incriminating information.
Joe Messino learned what he should and should not do.
At the same time, he encourages a major new front in the way the mob earns money: Wall Street.
The 90s brought a tremendous bull market, enormous amounts of money, and some loose regulations. Everybody wanted to be in the market. Everybody was making money who was in the market. So it was really a perfect and fertile ground for organized crime.
In the bull market of the 1990s, the last don of the American mob, Joe Messino, is about to make a killing. By 1993, Bonanno family boss Joe Messino is the last of his kind, an old-school godfather who believes in the code of silence and secrecy characterizing the golden age of the American mob. But he's also an innovator when it comes to earning, seizing new opportunities not in Bensonhurst, but on Wall Street.
By the time Joe got out of prison, the heady days of labor racketeering were pretty much coming to an end. So the big money that the mafia was making through labor racketeering was really just not available anymore. And they began to move towards Wall Street.
In the 90s, it was certainly a bull market. There were tons of new companies. The internet was sort of new and burgeoning at the time. And certainly where there's a lot of easy money to be made, you can rest assured that the mob's going to be there to make it.
Legitimate stockbrokers must follow the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission, but not Joe Messino and the Bonanno family. Fraud is the key to their success.
The underbelly of Wall Street is where the mob operates. That's where the boiler rooms come in. These boiler rooms are filled with very young kids, unsophisticated kids, who have one task, and that is to sell stock and to say whatever they need to say and follow whatever script they have in front of them to make sure they accomplish that task. Most of the boiler rooms look like New Year's Eve party had been thrown the night before. Often scantily clad women walking around, stacks of papers, cigarettes, alcohol. Looks nothing like you'd imagine that a brokerage house looks like.
The game is called pump and dump, and it works like this. Mobbed-up traders acquire large blocks of stocks worth $5 or less. By controlling supply, they increase demand, artificially inflating the stock's price. Then they sell those stocks to unsuspecting investors for much more than the original value, in turn earning an enormous profit.
The mob makes sure that things stay in order, and if they don't successfully do their job, they're going to get a beating.
Violence, threats, extortion, blackmail. The mob is a master at bullying.
The fear of the violence is what keeps everybody in line.
They make sure that those boiler room kids keep that stock put away, they sell it, and they don't let it get sold back to the market. It's paid in cash and it's undisclosed. There's no paper trail, nobody knows about it. You get a bag of cash on Friday.
The cash is divvied up, some going into the broker's pocket, the rest going to the bosses. Raking in the cash for Joe Messino of the Bonanno family is this guy, Robert Lino.
Lino was the muscle at the higher level. He was the capo. He was the one who represented him in sit-downs. He was the one who essentially ran a investment firm in Lower Manhattan called DMN Capital, which was under the auspices of the Bonanno family.
To rout out the Bonanno family's corruption on Wall Street, Agent Kevin Barrows needs to get inside DMN Capital.
It was too risky in this day and age to have an agent try to go undercover, because you had to know somebody. It wasn't the days of, Joe Pistone, where it was somewhat easier to infiltrate. My partner and I began to really develop a lot of cooperating witnesses.
But not just any cooperating witness. His informant works as a mole inside the mob's boiler rooms. With his help, Operation Uptick is born.
The goal of an informant is always to get the next person up in the chain. As we always say, you've got to eat our way up the chain and get to the top.
The feds want banana boss Joe Messino, but before they can reach the top of that food chain, FBI agents must snare a smaller fish and catch banana capo Robert Lino on tape first. So they send their DMN informant to work wearing a wire, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If discovered, they'll almost certainly be killed.
You better get my money, and Louis, I better have it soon. I am gonna put the word out with everybody I know, everybody you know. You're done. You understand me? You rot.
There were times when we had him wired up and ready to go and found out somebody was coming. We'd take the wire off seconds before he walked in. Simply because Robert Lino was a very tough, very violent guy. But my partner and I were extraordinarily successful at getting people to cooperate. And we just kept getting more and more cooperators who gave us more and more information about more and more people, which led to more and more indictments.
Operation Uptick grows, putting increasing numbers of mobsters in the FBI's crosshairs, including Robert Lino.
And the largest federal arrest operation ever in the New York City metropolitan area, more than 600 FBI agents began arresting 120 defendants as a result of a 10-month investigation codenamed Uptick.
It really awakened the public and it awakened regulators.
But Joe Messino knows how to play the system like an old-school boss, and his anti-surveillance techniques pay off. He's never caught on tape and gets away clean in Operation Uptick. While the Bonanno family tries its hand at white-collar crime in Manhattan, back in Brooklyn, the old friendships on Bath Avenue are about to disintegrate. Starting with this guy, Tommy Reynolds.
Well, Tommy Reynolds, he's a cracked-out maniac. Smoking crack, kill you for a $100 piece of crack.
Reynolds and fellow Bath Avenue member Jimmy Calandra join a third guy, a street thug named Chris Ludwigson, on a heist that's supposed to be an easy score.
He notified me, he says, Jimmy, I got this score with this guy. Big money in his house, he has a safe in his house in his basement. The money Chris was talking about, you know, he said it was close to $1 million.
There's just gonna be a guy at home. It's an easy score.
I said, okay, sounds good. So I brought Reynolds with me, because Reynolds was always my guy to do scores with.
And at the time, Tommy Reynolds was one of the key people who was organizing the crack distribution ring, and he started using some of the product himself.
No one else was supposed to be in this house. Only this guy was supposed to be there. So we all get out. Chris waits in the car. I knock on the door. All of a sudden, I see this woman. I hear boom. Lady goes flying across the room.
Reynolds, in his crack stupor, accidentally pulled the trigger to the gun and shot her in the head in front of her then 9-year-old daughter.
I went there to go rob a safe, and Tommy Reynolds ends up shooting the lady by accident. I was like, what the I just get myself involved in? I was so ashamed of it. I mean, it's one thing, you know, killing someone from the street, but then you're killing an innocent woman. It was like so hard for me to live with.
Jimmy lived with that. I know that still affects him to this day.
As it turned out, there was no safe in the house at all, and they had just gotten bad information.
The violence is starting to get out of hand, even for a rough crew like Bath Avenue. A bloody battle over turf and bragging rights is about to start, and no one can imagine where it will end. In the 1990s, the Bensonhurst neighborhood of Brooklyn is the Wild West, with crews of young mobster wannabes trying to impress an older generation of gangsters. Guys like the Bath Avenue crew who work for Bonanno family boss Anthony Spiro. But there's another crew on the rise, and they're connected to the Colombo crime family.
Bath Avenue violence against members had more pride, ego, than just about anyone else. But there was a rival in the area, a group on 20th Avenue, who was extraordinarily
that grew up just like us. They lost some of their friends. They retaliated at the guys who killed their friends. So they were like tough like us.
There were a number of extraordinary violent shootings.
Look at the 20 Dairy kids. You know, everybody was always on high alert. I never left my house without a pistol. I had a bulletproof vest to play in the front, play in the back. Plus, I also had the strap on. When you got a pistol over here, you got a pistol over here. You know, you got two pistols like this. You know, we were ready to go to war. We didn't trust anybody. My friends were getting killed left and right. We were shooting people left and right.
When I think back, how much crazy was really was. It was like a shooting gallery.
Violence gets so extreme that Spiro steps in.
There was a sit down with their people. Spiro told me, you know what, we're gonna straighten this out. We're gonna put this underneath the table. Let's go forward, stuff like that. But Galino didn't want that.
Galino, the hothead of the Bath Avenue crew, wants more respect.
Galino was very upset about the lack of support that he was getting, and he obviously felt, as the person who carried out the Bickelman murder, that his place should be more important.
So Galino does the unthinkable for a small-time mob associate. He challenges Spiro, one of the most respected men in the Bonanno crime family, and a seriously dangerous individual.
Paulie G wanted his full support. You know, I'm with you. You're supposed to defend me. Them.
He wanted to kill Spiro.
Everyone knows that Anthony Spiro is, you know, one of the kings, one of the few bosses that still lives in the area. And in the middle of this heated confrontation on the public street, Galino pushes Spiro, puts his hands on him.
He gave himself a death sentence.
There are some rules that you cannot break.
I mean, you can't stay in a neighborhood after you hit a made member in a crime family because your own friends are gonna be the one to take you out.
Spiro essentially turned around and walked away, turned his back on Galino. That was the day that Paul Galino became a marked man.
Spiro gave the order to kill Paulie. And, you know, who's gonna kill Paulie? You know, Paulie's a hard person to kill. The only people that could kill Paulie were his friends.
He was holed up in his apartment. He doesn't know when the day of reckoning is going to come, and so he can trust almost no one. But he does trust Joey Calco and Tommy Reynolds. It's those two that were in the short list of people whose knock Galino would have responded to with an open door.
Tommy and Joey went to Paulie Galino's house on a Sunday. They asked him for something to drink. He opened the refrigerator door. As he opened the refrigerator door, Joey put a couple bullets in back of Paulie's head.
Galino fell to the floor dead.
You know, you could go from being on top of the list to, you know, they get a nod and two friends blow your brains out.
Galino, Reynolds, Calco, they've been friends for their whole lives. They grew up together. They marked their ankles together. And yet, at that critical moment, it was the two best friends that snuffed out Paul Galino's life because they were ordered to, but more importantly, because they wanted to, because they knew that it would be a path to their own rise within the Bonanno family.
They left like nothing happened. That's it.
But Paulie Galino's murder will change everything for the Bath Avenue crew. After Paulie Galino publicly shoves Anthony Spiro, a leading figure in the Bonanno crime family, he's marked for death. Spiro orders Galino's own friends in the Bath Avenue crew to kill him, and they do. A time-honored tradition in the mob. At the time of the killing, Jimmy Calandra, one of the original members in the Bath Avenue crew, is in jail, where he hears about the hit.
I called Tommy Reynolds that night from federal prison. I said, was it you? was it you? And he was crying. He said, no. He said, no. But I knew it was my friends.
Jimmy saw a lot of deceit and treachery and saw his best friend get killed.
I felt sick. I wanted to throw up. I was like a baby crying to myself, seriously. Paulie was a really good friend of mine, a dear friend, a childhood friend, and just, you know, I was never the type to kill my own friends. That wasn't me. You know, if Sparrow would have gave me the hit, in all honesty, I probably would have told Paulie. I stopped and I looked and I said, you know what, we're not friends no more over here. You know what we are? We became gangsters.
Law enforcement round up the remaining members of the crew while Calandra is still in prison. But when he gets out, his past catches up to him again. He's under investigation for an old murder in Staten Island, the unsolved killing of a woman with no connection to organized crime. New York Police Detective Tommy Dades has been piecing together the details and is getting close to an arrest.
I was investigating him to lock him up. He did some jail time. He got out, and he knew that we had just locked everybody else up, and he knew that the axe was going to fall on him sooner or later.
The feds knocked on my door and told me your past came back to haunt you. And when I got home, I didn't say a word about nothing. Then all of a sudden, people were flipping on me again. You know? I said, what the life is this? I keep my mouth shut. And then I come home, want to tell on me? It's no to you. I might as well flip too. What do you do, be a sucker?
By the 1990s, dozens of guys are flipping. The old code of silence, what used to be called omerta, no longer holds. Faced with the threat of life sentences in prison or getting whacked by their own side, gangsters up and down the ladder reconsider their options.
After my friend Paulie was murdered, I was at the point in my life, you know, I had enough. I wanted away from this life. You know, I sat down with a prosecutor, I made an agreement with him, and I testified against Anthony Sparrow.
Spiro, the one-time acting boss of the Bonanno family.
You know, it was hard. It wasn't easy. It's not an easy thing to do. Spiro was someone I knew for a very long time since I was a little boy that told me never to tattletale on anybody. You know, because at one time I really liked this guy. You know, I had respect for him. But when I sat down on the stand, all I thought about was how Anthony Sparrow used to send us out on missions for him. He might put on the nice guy appearance, you know, that gentle way about him. But I know deep inside, if he could, he would have me killed right there and then, if he could get away with it.
So Anthony Spiro was sentenced to life in prison, and he went to prison, and he died in prison. He did not cooperate, even though we very much wanted him to cooperate to build a case against Messino and the other members of the Bonanno family that were on the rise.
So Bonanno boss Joe Messino remains insulated from the problems created by the Bath Avenue crew and continues running his increasingly profitable empire.
Joe Messina was able to come home from prison and run a well-greased machine, and they made a lot of money.
Joe Messino is running the Bonanno crime family in an effective way, but what they were doing was they were leaving a lot of paper trails.
You have agents in the Bonanno Organized Crime Squad who are trying to figure out how can we get to this family. And they thought maybe the way to this is let's follow the money. Because a lot of these captains are now very wealthy, living the good life.
One of them is Sal Vitale, Joe Messino's brother-in-law.
Joe Messino taught Sal Vitale how to swim when they were little kids. I mean, they were just very, very close. Once Messino gets out of prison, their relationship becomes a little bit strained. Other members of the Bonanno Organized Crime family perhaps were jealous of Vitale or did not like his style of running the show, and so they're starting to whisper in Messino's ears about Vitale.
Then Vitale makes a bombshell discovery. He learns that his own brother-in-law wants him whacked. After mob boss Joe Messina was released from prison in 1992, he makes a series of sweeping reforms that turns the Bonanno family into a well-greased machine. But the family's foundation trembles when Messino's underboss, Sal Vitale, believes a rumor that the boss wants him whacked.
This is the ultimate betrayal for Sal Vitale. Here's the man who he loved more than anyone else, who he believes he served faithfully, and the fact that he may have wanted to kill him just switches something in Sal Vitale.
The underboss deciding to cooperate against his brother-in-law was the last nail in the coffin for Messino.
Federal prosecutors are claiming victory tonight after reputed mob boss Joseph Big Joey Messino was convicted on all counts of murder, extortion, and racketeering. Following the sweeping...
He's charged with 8 murders. One of the murders, Joe was facing the death penalty on that case. So he reaches out to the trial judge and says that he wants to cooperate.
Joey Messina finds out he's going to get the death penalty. The first thing he does is he cooperates. He had that fear that he was going to die in the chair, and he cracked.
And that was the first time that an official boss of an organized crime family had decided to become a turncoat.
Imagine, the head of the group.
He knew how to play the system, but when hit the fan, hit the fan.
Gosh, I mean, that's the ultimate betrayal, in my view, for a boss, somebody that is supposed to be so entrenched in this life, so entrenched in the ideology of this life, a leader. The fact that a boss could do that is devastating.
By 2003, the sun's finally setting on the American mob. After 70 years as the most powerful organized crime force in the United States, Cosa Nostra is decimated. The mob first stumbles in 1970 when mafia boss Joe Colombo steps out of the shadows and into the public eye, and is gunned down shortly thereafter by a mob-hired hitman. It continues with the landmark infiltration of the Bonanno family by FBI agent Joe Pistone, and the prosecution of the leaders of the 5 families in the commission case by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani in the 1980s.
We have now proven in a court of law, beyond a reasonable doubt, not only that there's a mafia, but that there's a commission, that it runs the mafia.
Publicity-hungry Don John Gotti turns out to be another nail in the coffin in the 90s. But it all culminates with the betrayal by the last Don, Joe Messino, when he becomes the first boss of a family to cooperate with the federal government.
Joe Messino's conviction really was the end of an era for the 5 families in New York.
That's sort of the real deterioration of all their values, all their principles.
The underworld, as I knew it, has been pulverized, pummeled. What there was then, certainly I don't see now.
They're on the run because the Justice Department and local law enforcement in those regions have gone after the mafia with a vengeance.
You know, too much technology, too many people talking, too much law enforcement, too many cameras, you know, too many people taking pictures.
Organized crime still exists, but it's not the same.
There's still thugs that hijack and sell dope and run prostitution and gambling rackets, but it's nothing like it was.
Is there a handful of real tough guys out there? Is there a handful of guys out there that got good schemes going on? Yeah. To compare it to anything of like it used to be, those days are over forever.
The mob's downfall is the culmination of a determined, decades-long campaign by law enforcement.
The goal that the government had was to denude the Cosa Nostra of all its armaments. They have succeeded.
We took a lot of their assets, their money-making opportunities away from them.
We took them from being the top organized crime group in the country to just another organized crime group. We really kicked the out of the mob.
One key victory, the breaking of the code of secrecy known as omerta, practiced on pain of death for decades, now in ruins.
What separated us is that we had that structure. We had that respect. We had that honor. And we had to abide by it or there were serious consequences.
There was greed, there was jealousy, and all of a sudden the principles and the honor was out the window.
La Cosa Nostra, you know, I believed in it at one time. It's like
Like when I was a kid, I believed in Santa Claus. As I got older, I didn't believe in Santa Claus anymore. And it's the same way with La Cosa Nostra.
They had these delusions of grandeur. I think by the time you get to 2003, all the delusions of grandeur are gone, and they're just a bunch of creeps. My father, from the time I was young, would describe them as bullies. If you need 2 or 3 men to fight your battles, you're not a real man, my father would say. A real man can fight his own battles.
But almost no one believes the mob is gone for good.
The mob has taken a lot of hits. They're wounded, gravely, but not mortally.
This thing is cyclical. Organized crime, boom, they pound on everybody for a period of time, and then something else becomes important. Terrorism becomes important. So they take the agents off, they focus on that, and the guys on the street, they build up again.
It's what some people call the cockroach theory. When the lights are out, the cockroaches roam freely. If you turn the spotlight on them, they have to scurry.
I remember talking to Sandy the Bull Gravano about this, and he said one theory is everybody lay low for 10 years, the government will go away, we'll come back, we'll be stronger than ever.
It's going to grow again. There's going to be a spike. And this time when it spikes, it's going to spike bad. There's a fresh crew coming out after serving 20 years. They're coming out in the next year, the next 2 years, coming back to Brooklyn. They know nothing but to commit crimes. They're going to come back old, tired, and hungry. God knows what's only going to happen when they hit them streets.
Came in running in.
Should you return my blue jacket?
Yes. And after a very intense conversation with their saleswoman that ended with both of us in tears, I got...
Illumination. Illumination.
The year was 1985, and the #1 show on TV was Evil Brat. The show starred young Balthazar Brat as a child prodigy and criminal mastermind bent on world domination.
There he is! Got him! Wham!
I've been a bad boy. Brat was the biggest child actor of the 1980s, striking a chord with audiences all over the world.
There he is! Got him!
But it all came to an end in season 3, when
I've been a bad boy.
the young star experienced an unexpected growth spurt. The show was canceled. Hollywood rejected him, and Brat quickly plunged into a downward spiral, starting to actually believe he was the character he played on TV.
What are you looking at?
Leading us all to wonder, where is he now?
You know what, Clive? Playing a villain on TV was fun, but being one in real life is even better. Heist music!
Here he comes.
Ow! What? Clive, what are you doing? How is that heist music?
Sorry, my bad.
Wait, that's not a
This video may cause
wearing shoulder pads. There's only one supervillain whose fashion sense is quite that dated. Balthazar Brat. Blast it, the Dumont diamond is on.